Hey there, night owl. Glad you stumbled into this quiet little corner of the internet. If you're already curled up in bed, maybe the lights are off, maybe there's a gentle fan humming nearby, or maybe you've got your favorite drink beside you. Perfect. Because tonight, we're diving into one of the strangest questions you probably never asked, but once you hear it, you can't help but wonder, can animals control the weather? Not just sense it or run from it, but actually shape it, influence it, maybe even summon it. I know it sounds wild, but nature has a way of keeping secrets where we least expect. If this kind of soft, curious unraveling is your vibe, I'd love if you gave the video a like, maybe subscribed or dropped a sleepy thought in the comments. No pressure. Just you, me, and the strange powers of the natural world. Let's begin. There's a quiet kind of magic in the way animals move through the world. They don't check the weather app. They don't watch the sky with nervous glances or debate whether to bring an umbrella, and yet somehow they always seem to know. Long before the wind picks up or the clouds gather like a slow, sleepy army overhead, animals begin to act differently. Birds drop low, ants retreat, frogs sing in strange rhythms. It's subtle like a whisper from the earth that only they can hear. And maybe that's the first clue that nature doesn't always shout. Sometimes it nudges gently. You see, we've always assumed that humans are the ones reading nature, interpreting it, decoding it. But what if we're the ones being left behind? Tonight I want to take you on a slow, meandering journey through the animal kingdom, not with facts and charts, but with wonder, with curiosity and pajamas. Because somewhere along the way, as we built our cities and satellites, we might have forgotten that animals never stopped listening to the earth. And some of them might be doing more than just listening. Let's begin with a bird. Not a particularly exotic one, no glowing feathers or mythic legends. Just an ordinary seabird, a gull, or maybe a petrel. On the surface, they seem like any other drifting silhouette on a cloudy shoreline. But to meteorologists who study storm patterns in the open ocean, they're practically flying barometers. These birds have an uncanny ability to respond to subtle changes in atmospheric pressure. Before a storm even appears on radar, they're already in the air, adjusting their altitude, redirecting their path, avoiding the invisible churn of wind and water. But they don't just flee. Sometimes they move toward something, as if pulled not by fear, but by instinct or knowledge. It's easy to brush this off as evolution and inherited skill refined by time. But when you see them navigate a storm better than $1 billion weather satellite, you start to wonder, are they reacting? Or choosing now, shift your attention downward, to the ground, to the quiet, damp world of frogs. They don't make the news. But if you've ever grown up near rice paddies or riverbanks, you know the sound they make right before the rain comes. Not during the storm, not after, but before. It's not just anecdotal either. Farmers have relied on their calls for centuries. Some species begin their chorus hours in advance, triggered by microscopic shifts in humidity or barometric pressure that even our instruments struggle to detect. It's like their skin drinks in the air, decoding messages we can't read. And again, you wonder, is it sensing or summoning? Further down, even smaller still, are the ants. Watch them carefully one evening, especially in regions where rain doesn't come often. Before a downpour, they don't just retreat. They rebuild. They reinforce their tunnels, seal certain chambers, rearrange their colonies in precise, almost architectural ways. This isn't panic. It's planning, as if they knew the schedule, as if they'd gotten the memo directly from the clouds. And maybe in a way they did. You see, the deeper we look, the stranger it gets. Because this isn't about one or two animals doing impressive things. It's about entire ecosystems reacting like instruments in an orchestra, each playing a part in a song we can't quite hear. Bees change their flight paths before storms. Elephants migrate days in advance of distant rains. Even fish, yes fish, alter their swimming patterns based on shifts in underwater pressure tied to distant weather systems. But this is where the idea shifts from mere sensing to something more. Not control exactly, not in the way humans dream of it with buttons and machines, but influence, participation, a kind of quiet negotiation between creature and climate. Let me take you to the African savanna. In regions prone to drought, herds of elephants sometimes walk in seemingly random directions, miles, even days, until they arrive at watering holes that haven't existed in months. And within days of their arrival, the rains follow. Is it coincidence or causality? Could their movement, their vibrations, their subtle disturbance of the land in some small way contribute to atmospheric change? Scientists are beginning to ask these questions not because they sound magical, but because the data nudges them there, because these patterns repeat, because when you look long enough, nature starts to feel less like a clock and more like a conversation. And so we wonder if animals can influence their environment, and the environment, in turn, shapes weather. Where does one begin and the other end? Maybe it's not about control in the human sense. Maybe it's not about making it rain on command. Maybe it's about participation, about being part of a feedback loop so subtle, so ancient, that we forgot it ever existed. Imagine living in sync with the clouds, with the wind, with the breath of the earth itself, not manipulating it, but dancing with it. That's where we'll go next, into the world of birds and pressure systems, of wings slicing through charged air, of creatures that don't just survive weather, but surf it, shape it, maybe even shift it. So stay with me. Keep your lights low, your heart soft, and your mind open. The weather isn't what you think, and the ones shaping it might not walk on two legs at all. Let's lift gently into the sky now, not soaring wildly, but gliding, like a seabird tracing the contours of invisible currents above an open ocean. If you've ever stood on a windy shore and watched gulls or petrels sweeping low across the waves, you've probably noticed something odd. They don't flap frantically. They rarely look hurried. Instead, they ride the air with such precision it feels like they're dancing on the breath of the planet. But beneath that grace is a deeper story, one woven into the pressure and pulse of Earth's atmosphere. You see, seabirds, especially the ones who live far from land, have evolved into some of the most sensitive barometers nature has ever designed. Long before meteorologists detect an incoming storm, seabirds already know. They don't just feel the wind, they understand it. They don't just flee from a storm, they anticipate it, calculate it, sometimes even seem to embrace it. Take the shearwater, for example. These birds can travel thousands of miles over open water, rarely touching land. To navigate such brutal conditions, they rely on something far more sophisticated than instinct alone. They respond to pressure gradients in the air, tiny shifts that most creatures, including us, can't detect. As the atmosphere begins to dip in pressure, indicating a low-pressure system, and likely storm shearwaters start adjusting their altitude. They'll rise or drop, depending on the depth of the pressure trough, subtly repositioning themselves to avoid turbulence or to catch wind patterns that will aid their flight. They don't panic. They don't scatter. It's measured, controlled, almost like they're reading an invisible map across the sky. But here's where it gets even stranger. In certain cases, researchers have noticed that seabirds don't always avoid storms. Sometimes they fly into them, not recklessly, but with purpose. They use the spiraling winds to slingshot themselves forward, surfing the edge of the system to conserve energy while covering vast distances. This isn't just survival, it's strategy. And it raises the question, what kind of internal system allows a creature to do this? Some studies suggest that seabirds have highly developed mechanoreceptors, tiny organs that detect subtle changes in air pressure, temperature, and magnetic fields. But others hint at something more mysterious, a kind of embodied weather sense. A lived-in, constant feedback loop between bird and sky, almost as if they and the wind are in dialogue. And this conversation isn't just for show, it affects entire ecosystems. When seabirds change their migration or feeding patterns based on weather signals, they ripple those changes down the food chain. Fish move, plankton bloom. Even predators adjust their habits. The birds aren't just reacting to weather, they're reshaping it indirectly through behavior that modulates where and how energy moves across the ocean's surface. And if that sounds abstract, imagine this: a colony of petrels chooses not to fly out to sea on a given morning. That decision means fewer fish are eaten, which means more plankton survive, which means more carbon gets drawn down into the ocean depths, which affects temperature, which influences clouds, which nudges the weather. A single wingbeat magnified by time and scale could become a climate echo. And it's not just theory. There are entire branches of science now devoted to biotic weather. Feedback the idea that living organisms, through patterns of movement feeding migration and reproduction, are shaping atmospheric conditions in real time. It blurs the line between weather and behavior, between storm and instinct. And birds, especially seabirds, seem to be at the heart of this delicate equation. Let's imagine for a moment that you are one of them. You wake with the wind. You feel the world not with your skin, but with every molecule of air that brushes against you. You taste humidity. You listen to pressure. The sky becomes your compass, the ocean your mirror. And as the clouds build in the distance, you don't retreat. You tilt your wings, adjust your path, and ride toward the storm, not out of defiance, but out of understanding. You know it will lift you, push you, carry you exactly where you need to go, not because you command it, but because you are part of it. And maybe that's the point. Seabirds don't control the weather in the way we think of control. They don't press a button or cast a spell. But through their flight, their choices, their exquisite responsiveness, they participate in it. They shape the flow. They adapt in ways so precise they influence the balance of energy in the sky. It's not domination, it's dance. And now, as we drift back to our own warm, quiet rooms, still and small beneath the sleeping sky, we might feel just a little more connected. Like maybe on some level the wind that brushed against a seabird's feathers today might ripple into the breeze tapping at our window tonight. And if we listen closely, maybe we'll hear the conversation. In the next part of our journey, we'll come down from the sky and walk among fur and whiskers into the strange world of household animals. Dogs, cats, and their odd little rituals before storms. What are they picking up? And could their behaviors hold secrets too long dismissed as coincidence? We'll explore that next, but for now, let the wind settle. Let your thoughts drift like feathers. You're exactly where you need to be. Let's step back down from the sky, gently. Soft paws, touching carpet hardwood floors, warmed by sleepy footsteps, fur brushing against ankles in the quiet of evening. Because the next chapter in this story of animal intuition, and maybe even influence, unfolds not in wild forests or endless oceans, but right here, in your home, or perhaps in a neighbor's backyard. Familiar, furry, and often curled up on the edge of a couch like a loaf of contentment dogs and cats. Creatures we've lived beside for centuries. Creatures who have watched us worry about the weather, fiddle with umbrellas, check radar apps, and run to roll up the windows. But sometimes, if we're paying attention, we notice something strange. The dog begins to pace. The cat vanishes into the closet. The house goes still, not from peace, but from knowing. And hours later, thunder. You've probably heard the stories. Maybe you've lived them. A Labrador starts barking wildly, unprovoked, staring at the same corner of the yard. A tabby hides under the bed hours before the first drop falls. These aren't rare anecdotes, they're common. So common, in fact, that emergency services in some regions pay attention to animal behavior as an unofficial heads-up. It's not just storms, either. Earthquakes, fires, even medical episodes, animals often react before any human sense is triggered. But tonight, we'll stay with weather, rain, thunder, pressure, storms. And the question that gently tugs at the back of the mind: how do they know one possibility lies in hearing? Dogs and cats perceive frequencies well beyond our range, high-pitched vibrations that travel far ahead of visible weather patterns. The rumble of thunder may still be distant on the horizon, but to them it's already a conversation. The electricity in the air, the low hum of charged particles before lightning may feel like static crawling across their fur. But it isn't just about hearing, it's about sensing. Dogs in particular have noses so powerful they can detect drops in ozone before a storm. That crisp, sharp smell you sometimes notice before rain. For them, it's a symphony, and they don't just smell it, they react to it. Then there's pressure. Atmospheric shifts, those slow, silent changes in the weight of the air, often go unnoticed by us. But animals live close to the ground. Their bodies are attuned to subtle variations. A falling barometer might cause discomfort in joints, changes in mood, even mild disorientation. Some dogs will whine or become clingy. Some cats will grow irritable or retreat to enclosed spaces. They're not being difficult. They're reacting to a world that has suddenly shifted around them invisibly. And when we look at them, restless, nervous, different, we often dismiss it as odd behavior. But perhaps it's early warning. And here's where it gets a little stranger. Some pet owners have reported behavioral patterns so consistent they can predict a storm more reliably from their animals than from the weather forecast. One woman in Georgia told researchers that her golden retriever would disappear into the bathtub exactly 3 hours before every thunderstorm and never at any other time. A man in Japan said his cats would gather near the back door before every typhoon, even when no signs were visible in the sky. Scientists have documented dozens of such cases, enough to consider them more than coincidence. But what if it goes beyond sensing? What if just maybe the way these animals respond also shapes their environment? Let's slow that thought down. Consider this: if a dog becomes anxious and begins to move erratically around the home, it changes airflow. Small, yes, but measurable. A cat that shifts its position, choosing a warm, enclosed spot, may subtly alter the ambient temperature of a room. Multiply that by millions of animals across a continent, each one responding to weather in real time, creating microclimates, influencing airflow, shifting humidity ever so slightly. And what do you get? A feedback loop. It may sound fantastical, but modern meteorology already accounts for the impact of vegetation, human behavior, and urban environments on local weather. Why not animals? Why not consider that the energy they emit, heat, motion, moisture, even pheromones, could play some tiny part in the local atmospheric puzzle, especially when it happens at scale? Imagine millions of dogs in a region becoming restless, moving, panting, altering the thermal patterns of their homes just before a storm. It's not enough to cause a thunderhead, but it might affect how it unfolds, and that's the heart of this exploration: not control, but participation. Animals might not summon storms with a bark or a purr, but they could be part of the chorus that welcomes it, shapes it, prepares the ground for it in ways we're only just beginning to notice. We humans live in rooms, look at screens, and often forget that we are still connected to the rhythms outside. Our pets haven't forgotten. They've kept one paw in the natural world, one ear tuned to the low growl of a coming front. And when we pause long enough to watch them, to really observe them, we catch glimpses of a wisdom we lost long ago, a way of living that listens before it speaks. So the next time your dog whines without reason, or your cat hides under the sink when the sky is still blue, don't dismiss it. Watch, wait, wonder, because they may be hearing whispers on the wind you can't yet understand. And who knows, maybe in some small, secret way they're not just bracing for weather, they're part of its unfolding. In the next part, we'll step into wetlands and riverbanks and meet an old friend with slick skin and a song that seems to predict the rain like clockwork, the humble frog. Their voices have echoed through storms for millennia. But is it just instinct or something deeper? For now, settle in, let your breath slow, and know that somewhere nearby a pair of eyes watches the clouds, not with fear, but with knowing. Let's slip away from the cozy walls of homes and drift out into the damp, earthy quiet of marshlands. Somewhere beneath the twilight, the sky is turning the color of steeped tea, and the air grows heavy not with silence, but with the sound of something ancient. A slow, pulsing croak rises from still waters, then another and another, until the darkness is stitched together with a kind of music, not loud, not chaotic, just steady, rhythmic, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Tonight we're listening to frogs. There's something almost ceremonial about it, isn't there? That soft chorus after a long, dry day, as if the frogs know what's coming, as if they've decided to break the silence because the sky is about to open. Across cultures, continents, and centuries, people have noticed this pattern frogs sing before it rains, sometimes hours before, sometimes when the air still feels crisp and dry. Long before the thunder rolls, before the clouds gather thick enough to mean anything, the frogs are already in full voice. But how and why? Let's start with the most grounded explanation: humidity. Frogs have permeable skin, an evolutionary trait that allows them to absorb moisture directly from the environment. It also means they're exceptionally sensitive to changes in the air. When humidity rises even slightly, it signals that rain is likely. This is when frogs begin to emerge from their hiding places under logs, in leaf litter, tucked against stones, and take their positions near water. But it's not just the moisture they're responding to, it's the pressure. 2. A falling barometer tells them that a weather shift is imminent. Their bodies feel it long before we do. In fact, their internal state begins to shift: metabolism, hormone levels, behavior, all aligning with the rhythm of approaching rain. And so they sing. But the song isn't for us. It's a mating call, a biological response to the promise of wet conditions, perfect for laying eggs, for spawning new life in temporary pools that only exist during the rainy season. To the frogs, rain isn't inconvenience. It's opportunity. It's hope. And maybe that's why their chorus feels so primal, so instinctively wise. It's not just about the weather, it's about timing, about life's rhythm syncing with the planet's breath. In rural villages before radar and satellites, people listened to frogs. Farmers in Vietnam, in the American South, in Africa, in Japan, they all tell the same stories. When the frogs begin to sing in clusters, the rain will come. And they're rarely wrong. Some cultures even use frog songs to predict the intensity of rainfall. A deeper, more urgent croak might signal a stronger storm. A scattered soft chorus might mean only a drizzle. It's a kind of meteorology passed down through generations, not with instruments, but with ears. But what if there's more? What if the song itself, those deep resonant vibrations, doesn't just respond to the weather, but interacts with it? Sound is energy, after all. Vibrations moving through the air, through water, through the ground. In dense wetlands, a collective frog chorus can produce enough low-frequency sound to be felt in the soil. Could this energy, this rhythmic pulse, somehow contribute to condensation, to pressure, redistribution, even to triggering the very rain the frogs seem to anticipate? It sounds improbable, but in atmospheric physics, even small disturbances can matter. A butterfly flaps its wings, and somewhere a storm shifts. So what happens when 1,000 frogs sing in unison? Scientists have started to wonder the same thing. Acoustic biologists have begun measuring frog choruses alongside changes in local temperature and humidity. In some cases, they found microclimate variations near large gatherings of frogs, slightly higher moisture retention, slightly different wind behavior. Nothing conclusive yet, nothing grand, but it nudges the question. Could these small, seemingly passive creatures be shaping their environment in tiny, iterative ways? And perhaps that's all it takes. Not a dramatic Hollywood-style summoning of rain, but a slow, steady influence. A reminder that weather isn't always dictated from the clouds downward. Sometimes it builds from the ground up, from breath, from song, from soft, wet skin pressing against the earth and releasing a sound that's been echoing through the darkness for millions of years. And here's something else to consider. Frogs don't just predict storms. In some places, they follow them. Researchers in Central America found certain tree frogs that relocate in anticipation of week-long weather systems. They leap toward temporary pools that haven't filled yet, trusting that the rain will follow. And it does. Whether this is instinct memory or some deeper attunement, we don't fully know. But the precision is uncanny. It makes you wonder, have frogs always known something we forgot? Maybe they don't control the weather in the way we define it, but perhaps they belong to it in a way that makes our definition feel hollow. Their songs aren't demands, they're invitations, openings, threads that connect water to wind air, to earth, biology to sky. When they sing, they're not asking for rain. They're becoming part of its arrival. So the next time you hear a frog's call late at night, don't rush to close your windows or check the forecast. Sit still. Listen. Let the ancient rhythm wash over you. Because that voice, low and pulsing through the dark, isn't just noise. It's memory. It's the earth reminding itself how to breathe. In our next chapter, we'll go even smaller down into the soil, into the tunnels of ants. We'll explore how these tiny architects seem to know when the rains are coming and how their actions might hold clues to a much larger weather conversation. But for now, rest easy. Let the night unfold. Let the frogs sing you into the softness of sleep. Let's shrink now, not metaphorically, but truly gently shrink. Down past the blades of grass swaying in the stillness of a windless night. Down through dew-heavy leaves and crumbling bark, down into the quiet, bustling underworld beneath our feet. Because here, in the soft tunnels and carefully carved chambers of the earth, something extraordinary is always happening quietly, systematically, almost invisibly. Tonight we're walking among ants. It might not be the most glamorous entrance in this journey through weather and the creatures that dance with it, but perhaps it's one of the most humbling. Ants are at a glance unremarkable, tiny, uniform, sometimes even irritating. But what they lack in drama, they make up for in precision, in scale, in timing. And as we'll see tonight, they just might hold a secret connection to the very clouds above us. Let's begin with the basics. Ants build, constantly, tirelessly. Their nests, whether deep underground nestled in rotting wood or woven into vegetation, are not haphazard collections of dirt. They're elaborate purpose-built structures, hallways, storage rooms, ventilation shafts, water drainage zones. And these nests don't just appear randomly, they're actively maintained, repaired, and when necessary, redesigned. And that, dear listener, is where the weather comes in. Across the globe, scientists and farmers alike have observed something curious. Ants often begin modifying their nests hours or even days before a rainstorm arrives. Not during, not after, but before. They seal entrances, reinforce tunnel walls, move food stores to higher ground. In flood-prone regions, they build mounds taller than usual, with sharply sloped sides that help shed water. Some species even construct emergency chambers designed specifically to hold air in case their nest becomes submerged. And they do all of this without a weather forecast. No satellites, no apps, just an uncanny sense of when the skies are about to change. So, how one theory points to pressure. Like frogs, ants are extremely sensitive to shifts in barometric pressure. As a storm system approaches and the weight of the air above begins to fall, ants may perceive this as subtle changes in airflow or vibration. Some researchers believe their antennae, those delicate, always busy instruments, can detect the difference. Another possibility lies in scent. Rain brings changes in the chemical makeup of the air. Moisture can carry different pheromones or unlock hidden scents in soil that only ants can detect. Their whole world is a symphony of smell after all. But sensing a storm is one thing. Preparing for it is another. The coordination alone is staggering. A single ant colony can number in the tens of thousands. And yet, in the face of oncoming weather, they act not as a chaotic swarm, but as a unified organism. One team moves larvae to safety, another shores up tunnel walls. Foraging ants return with unusual speed, as if called back by some silent internal alarm. It's not just responsive behavior, it's organized behavior. Preemptive, purposeful, as if the colony as a whole remembers what happens when the rain comes, as if they've rehearsed it 1,000 times before. And here's something even stranger. In some cases, the very construction of an ant nest can serve as a weather predictor for humans. Certain indigenous groups in South America and Africa have long observed that when anthills are built taller with steeper angles, heavy rain is on the way. Some tribes incorporate these observations into their planting and harvesting schedules, and more than once, those ant-built forecasts have proven more accurate than regional meteorological predictions. But let's take it a step further. What if the way ants respond to weather doesn't just reflect it, but affects it? It sounds strange at first, but consider this: ants move soil. Lots of it. In fact, they're among the most prolific natural engineers on the planet. Through their constant excavation, ants aerate the soil, change its composition, alter drainage paths, and redistribute organic matter. In doing so, they change how water flows, how it pools, how it evaporates. And because water movement and evaporation directly influence local humidity and temperature, there's a small plausible argument to be made that ants, millions of colonies across entire ecosystems, might play a subtle role in shaping microclimates. Think of a rainforest floor or a savanna during monsoon season. Imagine 1,000 colonies responding to early storm signals, shifting dirt, sealing chambers exposing new patches of soil. All of it changing how water and air interact with the land. Multiply that by time and distance and life, and maybe, just maybe, ants aren't simply passengers in the weather story. Maybe they're low-level editors, adjusting punctuation, smoothing edges, making sure the flood never reaches too far. And, of course, they do it all without panic, without announcements. Just small bodies working in unison, grounded in instinct older than language. Perhaps they don't know the storm is coming in the way we think of knowing. But their world, their senses, their connection to the soil, those things feel it. And they respond with the kind of grace we've long since forgotten. So the next time you pass an anthill, don't stomp it. Don't brush it aside. Look closer. Ask yourself what those tiny architects might already understand about the sky. Maybe the wind feels different to them. Maybe the earth whispers to them when the clouds start to gather. Or maybe, just maybe, they're listening to something we stopped hearing a long time ago. Next, we'll rise gently from the soil and hover with something far more delicate: bees and flying insects. Creatures whose flight patterns shift before the rain, whose wings hum with more than just purpose, perhaps with prophecy. But for now, rest. Let your mind settle into the cool dark. Let the world grow small. The ants are watching the weather. You can close your eyes. Let's rise now. Gently. From the damp, earthy maze of ant tunnels, we lift upward past roots and blades of grass, through still morning air, or the golden hush of late afternoon, into the space where wings whisper and sunlight flickers through translucent shapes. Bees, hovering, darting, humming like tiny, winged thoughts, flitting through the mind of nature. If ants are the silent engineers of the underground, then bees are its poets, delicate, fast-moving, impossibly precise. And yet, for all their lightness, for all their seeming fragility, they carry secrets in their flight. Secrets about weather, about air, about timing, secrets we're only beginning to understand. It begins with a question. Have you ever watched bees just before a storm? Not just during the frantic rush for cover, the sudden disappearance from flowers and windowsills, but before, hours before the first cloud rolls in, when the sky still seems calm and blue, when nothing in your bones tells you to worry. The bees know. Their movements shift. Their flights become more urgent, more focused. The slow, wandering exploration of blooms becomes a direct line from source to hive, again and again. Fewer detours, no hovering, no dancing in the sun, just business. Fast, purposeful, efficient. And then absence. As if the garden exhaled and their bodies vanished into it. Researchers have observed this pattern for decades. In controlled environments and open fields alike, bees begin adjusting their behavior hours before rain. Theories, of course, abound. One of the most supported is barometric pressure. As pressure drops in anticipation of a storm, bees sense the change and respond accordingly, wrapping up their foraging runs, returning to the safety of the hive. But pressure isn't the only signal. Some scientists believe bees also detect shifts in air ionization, subtle increases in humidity, or the low frequency sounds that precede thunder. Whatever the mechanism, the result is clear: bees react early, and they react with precision. But let's step deeper. What does that reaction look like? Inside the hive, activity accelerates. Worker bees that would typically spend the day outside suddenly focus inward, sealing cracks, strengthening internal structures, regulating temperature. Think of it like storm-proofing a fortress. And again, this isn't a panic response. It's a system, a pattern honed over millions of years, played out not in fear, but in rhythm. The hive becomes quieter, denser, more tightly tuned to itself, as if the whole organism, the hive as a single being, has decided to take a breath and hunker down. Outside, the change is more subtle. Bee flight isn't just about movement, it's about angles, altitude, air resistance. In the hours before a storm, bees fly lower, much lower, sometimes just inches above the grass, hugging the ground in tight arcs. They do this not out of laziness, but because wind patterns near the surface are more stable. Flying low helps them stay upright, stay focused, avoid being tossed by gusts that haven't yet made themselves known to human skin. It's a delicate adaptation, a kind of reading of the wind's intention, not just its behavior. And here's where it gets even more curious. Studies from several agricultural regions have shown that when bee behavior shifts before storms, pollination patterns shift too. Crops that depend on bee visits for fertilization, sunflowers, clover fruit trees, may receive fewer visits in those hours, altering their reproductive cycles slightly. In some cases, this results in delayed blooming or staggered fruit development. In other words, the bee's decisions ripple outward. Tiny choices magnified by time shape not just weather response, but ecosystem timing. And because plants release moisture and chemicals into the air, molecules that influence cloud formation and temperature, we're left with a strange, beautiful idea. Bees might be altering the weather indirectly by altering the rhythm of plants. It's not far-fetched. Scientists in the field of biotic feedback loops have begun mapping how pollinator behavior interacts with atmospheric chemistry. When bees stop visiting flowers, certain volatile organic compounds go uncollected, compounds that otherwise evaporate into the air and seed the formation of small clouds. Imagine that, a single bee deciding not to visit a blossom, and somewhere a cloud goes unborn. Even more haunting is the way electromagnetic fields affect bees. Some researchers suggest that bees respond not only to pressure and smell, but to subtle electromagnetic shifts in the environment, fluctuations that sometimes occur before large storms or solar weather events. Bees may be, in some strange way, living barometers not only for local weather, but for disturbances far beyond our line of sight. The sky hums differently before it cracks, and the bees listen. And then, of course, there's the sound. The hum of a bee is more than just a byproduct of wings. It's communication. Vibrational messages passed between individuals, a kind of airborne Morse code. Before storms, this hum changes. It grows faster, sharper, tighter. Some hives produce an elevated collective buzz just before washu weather turns. Is it a warning, a coordination signal, or just a shift in mood? We don't yet know, but whatever it is, it's consistent. So are bees controlling the weather? No, not in the way we might imagine. They're not conjuring storms with nectar or shaking raindrops from pollen. But like the ants, like the frogs, they are in dialogue with the elements. They feel the air shift. They listen to the sky. And in return, their choices where to fly, when to land, when to stop, send ripples through the ecosystem. Some of those ripples may rise, climbing into the atmosphere with the scent of mist blossoms and altered moisture whispering into clouds before they're even formed. It's quiet influence, not loud, not obvious, but present. And in that presence we find something both comforting and profound, a reminder that life is always listening, always responding. That even the smallest wings moving through the still air before a storm carry wisdom we've forgotten how to hear. So the next time you see a bee flying low or watch your garden grow strangely still under a dimming sky, Take a moment. Breathe. Listen. There may be messages riding on that breeze. The bees have already heard them. We're just catching up. In our next part, we'll dive beneath the surface into rivers, lakes, and the vast quiet of underwater worlds. We'll follow the fish, those silver flickers of motion, and ask, do they too hear the coming storm? And how do their patterns shape the watery atmosphere we rarely think of as sky? But for now, let the hum fade. Let the air settle. The bees have gone home. You can too. Let's descend now, gently, past the buzzing of bees, past the rustling leaves and the whisper of the wind. Let gravity carry us downward, not with speed but with reverence, into a world where sound travels differently, where light dances in ribbons, and where pressure is not just a concept, but a weight that wraps around every living thing. We're slipping into water, into still ponds, winding rivers, and eventually into the deep, breathing silence of the ocean. Because here in this hushed and floating world, fish have been listening to the weather in ways we can barely comprehend. Not with ears, not with eyes, but with bodies made for feeling things we no longer feel. You might not think of fish when you think of weather. They're underwater, after all, hidden from the rain, immune to wind. But water, like air, is a medium in motion. It responds to the same rhythms, the same pulses from the sky above. And fish, with their ultra-sensitive skin, their lateral lines, and their electric fields, are more than passive observers. They're barometers in motion, currents wrapped in muscle and scale. Let's start with that strange, elegant line running along the length of most fish. The lateral line. It's not decorative. It's a sensory organ, one of the most finely tuned instruments in the animal kingdom. It detects vibrations, pressure changes, and subtle shifts in water movement. A distant splash, a nearby predator, or the long, slow roll of a coming storm. As atmospheric pressure drops before a weather event, it affects not just the air, but the water. Pressure presses down on oceans and rivers like an invisible hand. When that pressure lifts, when a storm system is approaching, fish feel it. Directly, physically. Their bladders expand, their buoyancy shifts, and they respond. Some fish dive deeper, seeking the heavier, more stable waters below. Others rise erratically, as if confused or agitated. Fishing communities have noticed this for centuries. Just before a storm, the fish change. They bite differently. They move differently. Sometimes they disappear entirely. Anglers speak of the quiet before the storm in lakes and rivers, not above them, but within. It's not poetic, it's real. A kind of stillness, a pause, as if the fish themselves are holding their breath. But the weather's voice in water isn't just pressure, it's electrical. Every thunderstorm is a generator filling the sky with static, with bursts of electromagnetic energy. When lightning strikes the surface of the water, it sends pulses through the entire column, reaching depths we once thought unreachable. Fish sense these pulses through electroreceptors, especially species like catfish sharks and electric eels. These creatures don't just feel electricity, they live by it. They navigate with it, hunt with it, communicate with it. And when the natural field of the environment changes, when a storm whispers through the ocean's skin, they notice. Some species even generate their own electric fields and use them like sonar. Electric fish in South America, for example, constantly scan their surroundings with low-level currents. When a storm nears, their electric field becomes disrupted, scrambled, slightly like static on a radio. They adjust, reorient, sometimes they retreat. Other times they behave in ways we don't yet understand, circling, hiding, pulsing faster, as if the weather above had reached into the water and tapped their spine. And here's where things get quietly mind-bending. Fish, through their movements, affect the chemistry of the water. As they rise or fall, they stir sediments. Their bodies release ions, nutrients, gases. These tiny changes ripple outward, affecting plankton oxygen levels, even microbial activity. Over time, the collective motion of fish, millions of individuals, can shift the balance of heat and matter in a given body of water. And that, in turn, affects evaporation rates. Moisture released from oceans and lakes forms the clouds we later see. A dance, a loop, from fish to air to sky. In some indigenous cultures, fish are not just part of the weather, they are the weather. In Polynesian navigation traditions, the behavior of fish is read alongside wind and wave to determine not just sea conditions, but sky conditions days ahead. Fishermen in northern Japan speak of sardines vanishing hours before typhoons, even when no wind has yet reached shore. In the Amazon, local tribes tell of electric fish whose movements signal the arrival of the first rains. These aren't legends, they're observations, repeated, trusted, carved into memory like the rhythm of tides. And maybe there's more. Maybe the quiet shifts in fish behavior are part of a larger atmospheric whisper, a signal passed like a relay baton across ecosystems. Frogs call, bees fly low, ants fortify, and in the deepest quiet, fish turn dip drift toward safety, each a small signal, each a thread in a larger web. Perhaps the weather doesn't arrive at nature, perhaps it emerges from it. Slowly, from roots, from wings, from scales and fins. So the next time you hear that a storm is coming, think of the fish, invisible beneath the surface, sensing the weight of the sky, reacting not in fear, but in rhythm. With every flick of a tail, every subtle shift in depth, they are part of a vast living equation, one that links the sea to the clouds, the unseen to the inevitable. In the next part of our journey, we'll meet a much larger creature, one whose steps shake the earth, whose memories stretch across generations, and who may just feel rainstorms from hundreds of kilometers away. The elephant. But for now, let the water settle. Let your breath become quiet and long. The fish are still. And so are you. Let's climb up now. Slowly. From the quiet hush of underwater drift to the sun-drenched dust of the savannah, from gills and gliding to footsteps that press deep into the earth. We rise into the presence of something ancient, something massive, not just in body, but in memory. Elephants. They do not scurry. They do not flinch. They move with the kind of patience only time itself seems to possess. Each footstep feels intentional, as if the land and the creature had agreed long ago where that foot would fall. And tonight we walk with them, not just to marvel at their size, but to listen for something deeper. Because elephants, it turns out, might be listening to the rain. Not just the rain we feel on our skin or see in the distance, but rain that hasn't yet arrived, rain that's still forming hundreds of kilometers away. And somehow, impossibly, elephants often begin to move toward it long before it falls. Stories from wildlife researchers and trackers across Africa echo the same quiet disbelief. Elephants start migrating before the first dark cloud has even formed, before satellite imagery shows anything worth noting. They change direction, alter course, move with intent toward places that days later will be soaked with the long-awaited arrival of wet season storms. It seems like magic, but as always with nature, it's something more profound: attunement. Sensory awareness layered with memory layered again with something we might not yet have words for. Let's begin with what we know. Elephants have extraordinary low-frequency hearing. They can detect infrasound vibrations and rumbles far below the range of human hearing. These sounds can travel for dozens, even hundreds of kilometers across open terrain, especially under the right conditions. Rainstorms, especially large monsoon systems, generate infrasound as they develop deep atmospheric groans that roll across the savanna like invisible thunder. While we remain unaware, elephants may already be turning their ears literally toward these distant murmurs. But it's not just sound. Elephants are experts in reading vibration. Their feet, wide and sensitive, can pick up subtle tremors in the ground, caused not just by nearby animals or distant footsteps, but by weather systems pressing down on the earth. Some researchers believe elephants can detect these shifts in pressure, in vibration, through the soles of their feet long before the signs become visible. They feel the approaching storm not with dread, but with orientation, with purpose, with an ancient understanding of how the planet moves. And then there's the memory. Elephants don't just know where water is, They remember where water was, decades ago, during previous droughts, in the patterns of their ancestors. Matriarchs' wise older females who lead the herds have been shown to guide younger generations across enormous distances to specific watering holes that have been dry for years, until, just as they arrive, the rains come. Coincidence maybe, but again and again it happens. And again, the younger elephants learn not through instruction, but through movement, repetition, trust. This triad vibration sound memory makes elephants something remarkable. Weather migrators, not chasers, not reactors, but participants in the unfolding of rain. By moving toward the moisture before it arrives, elephants often become the first step in ecological awakening. As they walk, they break brush, they open pathways. Their dung spreads seeds that will flourish when the rains fall. They disturb the soil, allowing water to sink deeper when it comes. They are not just seeking rain, they are preparing the land to receive it. And in doing so, they might even be nudging the weather forward. Think of a large herd, dozens of massive bodies moving in synchrony across open land. Their motion stirs heat, changes the scent, and humidity of the air alters the ground. If enough herds across a wide enough landscape move in unison, those tiny changes might add up, might ripple upward, might feed into the very dynamics that help storm clouds build. It's speculative, of course. But as science deepens its understanding of biofeedback loops, how life on Earth shapes weather, not just endures it, we find more and more evidence that even the slow footfalls of a migrating elephant may leave fingerprints on the sky. And maybe beyond all the mechanics, there's something else, something less measurable, but no less true, a kind of awareness. Not consciousness as we know it, but communion. Elephants don't just react to nature, they move with it. They follow invisible trails of moisture, of thunder, of memory, trails we can't see, but they walk as if they're lit by lanterns. Maybe they don't just feel the storm. Maybe in their way they remember it before it arrives. So the next time you see footage of elephants crossing the plains, or a herd silhouetted against a distant sunset, remember that you're not just looking at migration. You might be looking at a kind of listening, a listening so deep, so embedded in muscle and history that it becomes movement. It becomes guidance. It becomes rain. And with that we rest. Let your body grow still like the savanna in twilight. Let your breath slow like the hush before the first drop. The elephants have begun their journey, and you are already home. In our next chapter, we'll return to something much smaller but no less powerful, a tiny architect in silk spinning strands that may respond not only to prey, but to the moisture in the air. The spider. Do they weave more than webs? Could they be weaving? The wind. We'll explore that next. But for now, the sky is quiet. The ground is listening, and you are safe beneath both. Let's go smaller now. Much smaller. From the mighty presence of elephants, we descend once more this time into the forgotten corners, the spaces between things. The quiet crooks of tree branches, the eaves of silent roofs, the delicate spans between two blades of tall grass, swaying in a lazy breeze. We're entering a realm of stillness, of patience, of breathtaking precision woven from silence itself. Tonight we're with the spiders. There's a hush around spiders that feels different from any other creature. They don't buzz or croak or stampede. They wait, still. Tucked in the corner of a windowsill or beneath a leaf, they're often invisible until the light hits just right, and suddenly there it is. A web, a masterpiece suspended in midair, threads so fine they seem impossible, and yet strong enough to hold lives, hold stories, hold the wind. And if you've ever walked outside early in the morning after a humid night, you've seen them glistening like dreams, webs everywhere, catching dew like tiny constellations spun with purpose. But what you may not have known is that these webs might also be catching something else. Signals from the air, from the weather, from the future. You see, spider silk is more than silk. It's one of the most sensitive biological materials in the world. It reacts not just to touch or movement, but to moisture, to temperature, to the invisible whispers in the atmosphere that announce change long before we feel it. Scientists have discovered that certain species of spiders build their webs differently depending on humidity levels. In dry weather, the strands are taut, angular, geometric, optimized for speed. But when the air grows thick with moisture, when rain is on the way, some spiders alter their designs. The silk loosens, angles shift. The web becomes more flexible, able to absorb the weight of falling droplets or survive the shaking gusts that often precede storms. But it doesn't end there. Some spiders stop building altogether when storms approach. They hunker down, they retreat, and even more curiously, some destroy their own webs. They cut them free one thread at a time, letting the structure collapse. It's not panic, it's preparation, as if they know that trying to hold the line against wind and rain would be futile or fatal. And so they choose to fall silent, to become invisible again until the sky is calm once more. How do they know? How do these tiny creatures, often no bigger than a thumbnail, detect the coming weather? With such reliability, part of the answer again lies in the air. Spider legs are covered in fine hairs, trichobothria, that can detect minute changes in airflow, barometric pressure, and even the movement of charged particles in the atmosphere. When a storm is approaching, the shift in electrostatic field alone may be enough to set off a quiet cascade of behavioral change. The spider doesn't think in the way we do, it simply responds, elegantly, consistently, wisely. But there's something even stranger. Some species of spiders exhibit a behavior known as ballooning, a phenomenon where they release strands of silk into the air and quite literally float away, carried by wind currents across fields, forests, even oceans. It's often seen before large weather systems, a mass exodus into the sky. Scientists used to believe ballooning was random spiders catching a lucky breeze to escape overcrowding. But now we know it's more than that. The timing, the altitude, the direction it all points to, a kind of instinctual forecast. As if the spiders read the wind, feel the moisture, and launch themselves into it, like ancient navigators on threads of gossamer. And here's where it becomes haunting. The silk they leave behind, the webbing they spin, isn't inert. It holds charge. It responds to humidity, to vibration, to even the smallest shift in surrounding energy. Some researchers speculate that these webs act like instruments, weather vanes woven from living fiber. They collect data in a way no satellite can, not by numbers but by shape, by tension, by whisper. In old European villages, people once believed that if you saw spiders weaving high webs across bushes, rain was coming. And if the webs were low, close to the ground, it would stay dry. It wasn't folklore, it was observation. Passed down through fog and wood smoke, forgotten in the age of radar, but no less true. And so, again, we find ourselves at the edge of a quiet possibility. That the spider, with its delicate tools and ancient reflexes, is more than a silent builder. It's a barometer, a weaver of weather, not controlling it perhaps, but communing with it, responding in ways so precise they begin to resemble choreography. When the air grows heavy and the sky forgets its color, the spider doesn't run. It listens, and then it acts, sometimes by vanishing, sometimes by flying. And when we step back and look at the garden, the field, the forest through this lens, what we see changes. A glint of silk across the morning grass becomes a message. A missing web becomes a signal. A spider waiting motionless in its den becomes a sentinel of storm, of wind, of the breath of the world. So tonight, if you feel a shift in the breeze, if the trees lean a little differently, or the windows hum just slightly more than usual, imagine the spiders, waiting, tensing, releasing, and maybe weaving a story you'll only understand in raindrops hours from now. In our next chapter, we'll lift our gaze again, this time to the extremes, to the harshest deserts where survival depends on drinking air itself. We'll follow a small lizard that harvests water from fog, not by chance, but by design. Could it be in this dry land that weather is not just endured, but summoned? That's next. But for now, settle in. The wind has calmed, the web is still, and you are held softly between threads you cannot see. Let's travel to the edges now, to a place where life seems impossible, yet somehow thrives. The desert, a land sculpted by silence and sun where the air shimmers with heat and the horizon trembles like a mirage. It is not a forgiving place. It does not offer shade easily or water freely. Here, survival is not about dominance, but intimacy with sand, with sky, with the breathless rhythm of arid days and bone-chilled nights. Tonight, we kneel down in this dry expanse beside a creature that moves not with fear, but with quiet genius. A lizard, small, sand-colored, easy to miss. And yet what it does might be one of nature's most delicate miracles. It's called the Namib desert beetle lizard, though its true name depends on who you ask. In some texts, it's a thorny devil, in others, a fog harvester. But whatever name we give it, its method remains the same. It drinks from air, literally. In a land where rain may not fall for months, this lizard survives by collecting moisture directly from the wind, not by luck, not by accident, but through a beautifully evolved system, one that suggests weather isn't just something to endure, it's something to partner with. Let's look closer. The lizard's skin isn't smooth, it's covered in tiny grooves, channels that run between scales like a secret map. These grooves are hydrophilic, meaning they attract water. When the cool morning fog drifts across the dunes, droplets form along the lizard's body, rolling down into the channels where capillary action draws them toward its mouth. No licking, no sipping. The lizard simply stands still and drinks. But this isn't passive. This is craft. The lizard positions itself in the direction of the fog-bearing breeze, angling its body just right to maximize condensation. It lifts its head, sometimes climbs a rock, sometimes buries its feet for stability. It's not just being lucky, it's being intentional. And in that small act of standing still and catching air, it becomes, in a very real sense, a shaper of its own microclimate. Think about that. In a place where clouds are rare and puddles are fantasies, this lizard has found a way to create water, to coax it gently from air, to rewrite the rules of dryness not by conquering the desert, but by listening to it more closely than we ever could, and the implications ripple outward. Some biologists now believe that these kinds of micro-harvesting behaviors, when practiced across generations and entire species, could influence the distribution of moisture in arid regions. A colony of fog-harvesting insects, a community of dew-drinking lizards, all participating in a shared dance with the atmosphere, moving moisture, redirecting energy, even shaping local temperature gradients. Slowly, silently, but surely, over years, over centuries. Could it be that desert weather, often thought to be static and unchangeable, is actually in flux, shifting slightly subtly in response to life that refuses to give up? Some researchers studying desert ecosystems have begun noticing small, persistent anomalies, patches of slightly denser plant life near lizard nesting grounds, traces of moisture retention, where by all logic there should be none. They believe these creatures may be contributing to invisible humidity cycles, just enough to support a blade of grass here, a microbe there. And when life appears, it multiplies. It invites more moisture, more shade, more possibility, all seeded by a single lizard standing still in morning fog. And the design doesn't stop with skin. Some species of desert lizards regulate their body temperature so precisely they can create minute pockets of warm and cool air that alter how condensation forms around them. Others burrow in such a way that their tunnels trap dew at night, creating tiny reservoirs they return to over and over. These aren't passive survivors. These are artists of climate, alchemists of air. And it makes you wonder if a creature so small, so fragile, can do this with nothing but bone and instinct and patience. What else is possible? What else in nature is quietly sculpting the weather, not with force, but with subtle invitation? Because that's what this is, an invitation. Fog does not rush to the lizard, it's welcomed, coaxed, its moisture offered not in torrents, but in pearls. And in exchange, the lizard gives something back: movement that aerates the soil, droppings that fertilize micro-ecosystems, a body that casts shade for a single seedling long enough for it to catch the morning light. The line between creature and climate begins to blur. The lizard is not merely surviving the desert, it is in small and secret ways helping to reshape it. And maybe that's not so different from us, or at least from what we could be. Perhaps weather isn't something that happens to us. Perhaps it's something we're part of, in our breath, our movement, our stillness. We may not harvest dew from the wind, but we shape heat islands. We exhale moisture, we plant and walk and build, and through all of it, we send ripples into the sky, not all of them harmful. Some perhaps are like the lizard's grooves, small choices etched into the skin of the world that make space for life where it wasn't before. So tonight, if you find the air cool against your skin, if the fan hums gently or the window lets in a whisper of breeze, think of that little lizard standing on a dune, eyes half closed, drinking from the air, not chasing storms, not fleeing drought, just being so precisely, so wisely that the weather bends ever so slightly in return. In our next chapter, we'll rise once more into the oceans, into the realm of giants whose breath stirs the surface and whose waste feeds the world, the whales. And we'll ask, can something so massive truly shape the climate around it, with nothing but breath and depth and time? But for now, let the fog settle. Let your own breath soften. The desert is quiet, and you are safe within its stillness. Let's drift now, not by walking, not by crawling, not by climbing, but by floating, by surrendering to the pull of something larger, something deeper. We're leaving behind the heat of the desert and entering the vast blue cradle of the world, the ocean, a place where time slows, where sound travels farther than sight, where currents carry secrets older than memory. Beneath the surface, everything feels suspended, soft, enormous. And somewhere in that endless blue, a shadow moves, graceful, enormous, gentle, a whale. And tonight, we follow it not for song or spectacle, but for something far quieter and stranger. Because what if I told you that the breath of a whale, and even its waste, might shape the climate of the entire planet? It begins with stillness, a whale rising slowly through the water column like a cathedral made of muscle and memory. It exhales a plume of vapor into the air, and then slowly it dives. But what's left behind matters more than we've ever realized. Beneath its body, drifting in the sunlit zone of the sea, is a cloud of nutrients. Not glamorous, not poetic, but essential. A plume of iron, nitrogen, phosphorus released gently into the ocean like a gift. It's whale poop, and it might just be helping to cool the earth. You see, in the upper layers of the ocean, tiny organisms called phytoplankton live. They're microscopic, but they perform a task of planetary importance. They absorb carbon dioxide, tons of it, and release oxygen. In fact, these tiny floating plants produce over half of the oxygen we breathe, more than all the rainforests combined, but they need nutrients to thrive. And that's where the whales come in. When a whale releases its waste near the surface, it fertilizes the water. Like rain on dry soil, it triggers blooms of phytoplankton. These blooms in turn draw down carbon from the atmosphere and trap it in the sea. Some of that carbon sinks when the plankton die, falling into the deep, where it stays locked away for centuries. The process is called the biological pump, and whales unknowingly are one of its quiet drivers. It's sometimes called the whale pump, this gentle cycling of nutrients from deep to surface. Because whales don't feed near the surface. They dive deep, sometimes thousands of meters, to feast on krill or squid or small fish. And when they rise to breathe to rest, they bring those deep-sea nutrients with them. Then through waste, they deposit them into the sunlight, where plankton are waiting. It's a vertical dance, one that nourishes the entire food web, but also one that pulls heat from the sky. Because here's the incredible part. More whales means more phytoplankton. More phytoplankton means more carbon absorbed, and more carbon absorbed means a cooler planet, It's indirect, it's slow, but it's real. In the last 100 years, commercial whaling has decimated populations by up to 90% in some regions. And scientists estimate that in losing those whales, we may have lost billions of tons of carbon sequestration potential. Not through factories, not through machines, but through the absence of gentle giants. And this is not just about numbers, it's about rhythms. Whales don't just deposit nutrients, they move them horizontally, across oceans, from one feeding ground to another, from cold Antarctic waters to warmer tropical breeding zones. Each migration is a redistribution of life, a resetting of ocean chemistry, a stirring of the pot in the kindest possible way, and everywhere they go, life follows: fish, birds, bacteria. Even the whales themselves are ecosystems covered in barnacles, trailed by remoras, surrounded by invisible clouds of microscopic life. They are living weather systems drifting through blue. And yet for centuries we saw them only as meat, as oil, as harvest. We did not know that by harpooning whales we were punching holes in the lungs of the planet, that by silencing their songs we were also silencing one of the ocean's gentlest climate regulators. But maybe, just maybe, we're beginning to listen again. Whale populations in some regions are slowly recovering, and with them phytoplankton blooms are returning. The waters, it seems, remember and respond. Imagine for a moment the sigh of a whale echoing across miles of sea. Imagine that sigh lifting nutrients into the light, awakening clouds of plankton, drawing down sunlight and carbon, and sending oxygen into the air you are now breathing. That's not science fiction. That's today. That's now. That's what's happening beneath your feet when you stand on a beach, when you stare at the horizon and wonder what lies beyond. So, do whales control the weather? Not in the dramatic way we might imagine, but with every breath, every dive, every lazy circle beneath the waves, they shape it. Quietly, constantly, with no need for recognition, no desire for applause. And maybe that's the most powerful kind of influence of all. So tonight, as you lie still beneath your blankets with the hush of your own breath rising and falling like a tide, know this: somewhere out there, under starlit seas, a whale is rising. Its plume is meeting the wind, its body is sowing life, and the world is breathing just a little easier because of it. In our next chapter, we'll lift into the air once more, not with feathers, but with old slow muscle and instinct. We'll follow flocks of birds and ask a strange question: what if their synchronized flight isn't just survival, but subtle weather work? That's coming. But for now, the ocean sleeps, and so can you. Let's lift again, slowly, gently, as if the earth is letting go of us for a moment and inviting us to ride the invisible highways above. We're leaving the salt and depth of the ocean behind, rising past cliffs and trees and rooftops into a realm ruled not by gravity, but by grace, the sky, and in it something so familiar and yet so mysterious: birds. A flock moving as one slicing through the air in elegant mathematical silence. You've seen it before, perhaps without thinking: hundreds, sometimes thousands of birds wheeling and diving in perfect synchrony. Murmurations, V-shaped formations, wide slow glides. It's beautiful, yes. But tonight we're not watching just for the beauty. Tonight we ask, what are they doing to the sky as they pass through it? Because somewhere between wing and wind, scientists are beginning to wonder if birds, these ancient travelers, are shaping more than just patterns. They might be shaping the weather. At first it sounds fanciful: birds controlling clouds, affecting rain. But step slowly with me and the pieces begin to settle into place. Birds are not just inhabitants of the air, they move it. Every wing beat displaces air molecules, pushes moisture, stirs heat. In isolation it's barely noticeable, but in large groups, in sustained movement, the effect magnifies. Picture a murmuration of starlings, 10,000 small bodies shifting together, creating sudden vortices of air, pockets of turbulence. Those patterns, though brief, can disturb the local atmosphere just enough to alter how moisture behaves. And what begins as a ripple can sometimes lead to a shift. Researchers studying radar images of weather systems occasionally find anomalies, clouds that should have formed but didn't, or unexpected clearings in fog. Upon closer inspection, some of these coincide with massive bird movements. Migratory routes that stretch for thousands of kilometers, flocks that pass through known cloud-forming regions just as moisture levels are reaching critical mass. Coincidence? Possibly. But some atmospheric scientists have begun modeling the cumulative effect of bird movement, especially during large migrations, on microclimate behavior. The data is early, fragmented, but it whispers something intriguing that birds, through their collective motion, may influence where and how clouds form or even disperse. Consider heat. Birds generate it, retain it, and radiate it. A large flock settling into a forest or field can raise the local temperature by a measurable amount. This isn't metaphor, it's thermodynamics. And in regions where cloud formation depends on surface heat rising into the sky, these slight variations can matter. A few degrees warmer, and moisture lifts. A few degrees cooler, and fog lingers. Birds then become tiny climate nudges, quiet actors in the theater of clouds. Then there's the matter of aerosols. Birds carry particles on their feathers, dust pollen microbes. As they fly, these particles are released into the air, sometimes forming nuclei around which water vapor can condense. In high enough concentrations, this becomes a potential cloud seeding mechanism. Not engineered, not intentional, but organic, subtle. A flock of pelicans rising from a marsh may leave behind more than ripples. They may leave behind the seeds of tomorrow's sky. Some indigenous traditions have long believed that birds speak to the weather, that their songs and flight rhythms can either summon or calm storms. Modern science has often smiled politely at such stories, filing them under folklore. But now, as instruments become more sensitive, as models become more complex, we find ourselves circling back, asking whether those stories weren't metaphor, but memory, passed down through generations of watching the sky. And then, of course, there's the migration itself. Birds do not travel randomly. They move with the weather, sometimes ahead of it, sometimes beside it. Some species, like swifts, fly for days at high altitudes, navigating the upper layers of the atmosphere, where jet streams churn and cold fronts gather. As they move, they carry heat, moisture, and energy from one place to another. They become conduits connecting climates, redistributing balance, not through dominance, but through flow. One study in Northern Europe noted that when large flocks of geese delayed migration by just a few days early, frost occurred farther south than expected. The theory: their absence altered how heat dissipated across the region. Without the birds, the atmosphere settled differently. No conclusive proof yet, but again, another whisper. And perhaps that's the lesson. Birds are not controlling the weather in the way we imagine control. There are no buttons, no commands, but with every coordinated turn, with every burst of wing and warm body and lifted feather, they are interacting with it, just like the whales, just like the ants, just like us, only perhaps more gently. So the next time you see a flock cutting across the sky, don't just admire the motion. Wonder what else is being moved. Wonder what ripple they've left behind. Maybe a raindrop that doesn't fall. Maybe a breeze that bends. Maybe a cloud that thinks twice. In our next chapter, we'll land once more into the jungles and canopy, where vines reach for the sky and breath thickens. We'll ask what happens when plants and animals work together to make weather. Not just respond to it, but compose it. But for now, let your own breath settle. Let your mind drift like a feather caught in slow, purposeful flight. The birds have passed overhead. The sky has changed, and you are held quietly beneath it. Let's slow everything down now, even more than before. The breath, the thoughts, the distant rustling of leaves beyond the window. Let all of it become soft, like the final glow before twilight surrenders to night. Because tonight we're venturing into the places where survival feels almost mythical, environments so extreme, so raw, that just staying alive is an act of continuous negotiation. The polar ice, the salt flats, the high-altitude cliffs where oxygen thins and time seems to crack at the edges. These aren't just places life has adapted to. These are places where life, strange as it sounds, shapes the environment in return. Tonight, we ask a question, both quiet and astonishing. Do animals living in harsh environments create their own weather? Tiny, local climates born from breath heat and instinct. The idea might sound bold, maybe even absurd. But in the soft silence of nature's deeper rhythms, nothing is truly absurd, only unseen. Let's begin with heat. In Arctic tundras and alpine peaks, temperature is everything. For creatures like the snow hare or the Arctic fox, warmth is currency. They huddle burrow press close not only to retain heat, but to trap it, and in doing so, they warm the air around them ever so slightly. Studies have shown that inside the dens of some animals like lemmings or polar bear cubs, the ambient temperature can be up to 20 degrees Celsius warmer than the outside. But that warmth doesn't always stay sealed in. It leaks, rises, mingles with the cold, shifting air density in minute, measurable ways. Over time, and especially when replicated across populations, these thermal leaks can create tiny zones of altered atmosphere. Warmer air rises, cold air rushes to replace it. The smallest whisper of wind begins, a breeze that in a land of stillness matters. It's not a storm, but it's not nothing. Now imagine this replicated not just by one animal, but by thousands. A colony of penguins pressed together in a storm can raise the local ground level temperature by several degrees. From above, thermal cameras capture these huddles as glowing circles in a sea of ice. And beyond the warmth, there is moisture. Breath, skin, snow melted by body heat evaporates rising into the frigid air, where it recondenses in the upper layers forming frost patterns or even faint mist above the group. Insects do this too. In desert ecosystems, termite mounds generate not only internal climates, but impact the humidity and temperature of their immediate surroundings. Some large mounds act like chimneys, pulling cooler air through lower vents and releasing warm air at the top, altering airflow across the ground. In the harsh savannas of Namibia, entire ecosystems form around these mounds. Plants grow differently. Nearby, the soil holds moisture longer, and birds nest in the thermal protection they provide. One mound, one colony becomes an engine for microclimate. And if one can, why not hundreds? Even in the driest places, like the Atacama Desert, animals alter weather in whisper-thin ways. Lichens and beetles that harvest dew through their surfaces don't just consume moisture, they change where it goes, redirect it, trap it, spread it. These microtransfers of water vapor can in aggregate change how quickly the air loses or holds its humidity. That humidity affects heat retention, evaporation rates, even cloud formation patterns just above the surface. Still not convinced. Let's step into the Andes. There, in impossibly high elevations, certain rodents and birds nest together in cracks between rocks, forming tight, co-regulating colonies. They don't just warm each other, they change the air in the cavity itself. Oxygen levels shift, carbon dioxide builds slightly, then disperses as new breezes flow in. Over time, these exchanges mimic the early conditions of wind tunnels, gentle, directed flows that encourage specific plant growth along those passages, which in turn modify soil temperature. A cascade. A climate in miniature, made by fur, feather, breath. It's easy to miss these things when we look only at the grand scale. We think of weather as something made in the sky, but weather begins with movement, with heat, with pressure, with breath. And every animal in every extreme environment contributes some small stirring to the air around it. Multiply that by tens of thousands of creatures, day after day, year after year, and you begin to see a pattern emerge, slow, circular, unhurried, but undeniable. The animals are not just surviving harsh environments, they are softening them, shaping their edges, making space for life in places where life shouldn't thrive. And in doing so, They remind us that climate is not only something that descends from the clouds, sometimes it rises from the ground, from a paw print, a wing beat, a circle of breath shared in a hollowed-out rock. So tonight, as the world outside your window cools and settles into its nocturnal hush, remember that even in the coldest, driest, most forgotten corners of the planet, warmth is being made. Not by machines, but by creatures. Living, breathing weather systems wrapped in fur and scale and memory, each one shaping their air not with intention, but with presence. In our next chapter, we'll explore something stranger still. What happens when plants and animals begin to collaborate across species, across purpose, to engineer something bigger than either could alone? Could an entire ecosystem decide to make it rain? That's a question for tomorrow. But for now, breathe deep. Let the air around you settle. You are safe in your own microclimate shaped by the quiet, invisible warmth of life. Let's step into green now, into a space that doesn't begin with a horizon, but with a canopy, a ceiling woven from branches and breath. We're walking not across ground, but beneath a living sky. The rainforest. A place so alive, so endlessly layered, that it seems to hum even when still. Mist rises slowly. Light filters in, as if reluctant. And every leaf, every vine, every unseen root seems to carry a quiet awareness, as though the forest is not just a collection of organisms, but something more, something coordinated. Tonight, we enter this world not to observe, but to wonder. Could it be that plants and animals together are shaping the weather, not passively, not by accident, but in quiet collaboration? Could an ecosystem in its fullness plan for rain? At first, it sounds impossible. The idea of planning implies intention, consciousness, strategy. But what if we replace that word with rhythm? With coevolution, with cause and effect so tightly braided over millennia that the line between instinct and design begins to blur. In the Amazon basin, one of the wettest places on Earth, researchers have begun noticing something extraordinary. Much of the rain that falls there doesn't come from the ocean. It comes from the forest itself. Trees release vast amounts of moisture through a process called transpiration water, evaporating from their leaves, rising into the atmosphere, cooling, condensing, and falling again as rain. This is not a side effect. This is the engine of the rainforest, a system that recycles its own weather day after day in quiet defiance of drought. But here's the part that stops us. The amount of rain generated internally increases during dry spells. Trees under stress from heat and low moisture increase their transpiration rates. Why? The answer isn't simple. It might be chemistry, it might be signaling, but it looks from the outside like the forest is asking for rain. And sometimes it works. Now add animals to this picture. Insects pollinate certain tree species that release specific compounds into the air, compounds that act as cloud condensation nuclei. These volatile organic compounds, once airborne, help water vapor form droplets. Certain birds and bats help spread seeds of trees that release more of these compounds. Termites aerate the soil, helping roots draw more water. Large herbivores graze in patterns that shape vegetation density, which in turn affects local humidity. Every role, every action feeds into a shared atmosphere. The trees breathe, the animals stir, the air thickens, and the sky responds. In Africa's Congo Basin, something similar occurs. Elephants knock down trees, opening gaps in the canopy that let sunlight strike the forest floor. This sunlight warms the air, causing it to rise, creating lift. That lift helps moisture climb higher, feeding storm systems. Meanwhile, certain frog species begin calling more frequently on high humidity days, attracting mates, yes, but also triggering the emergence of flying insects, whose mass movement contributes even further to atmospheric stirring. 1,000 small signals, 1,000 threads in an unseen net, and at the center of it, not a conductor, but a shared pulse. Could this be planning? Not in the human sense, not with blueprints or meetings, but through feedback, through generations of trial, error, adjustment, and survival. A system so tightly tuned to itself that when trees suffer, insects respond. When air thins, leaves adapt. When moisture lingers too long, animals migrate, rebalancing the breath of the land. One researcher compared it to a distributed intelligence, not housed in any one species, but in the ecosystem as a whole. A kind of weather literacy woven into bark, fur, pollen, and feather. The forest isn't just reacting to weather, it's writing it one molecule at a time. And just like a symphony, no single instrument controls the music. But together, they shape the sound. This is more than poetic. Satellite data has confirmed that large tropical forests contribute to regional rainfall hundreds of kilometers away. Their evapotranspiration creates flying rivers, streams of airborne moisture that flow invisibly across continents. When those forests are cleared, rainfall drops not just locally, but in regions far removed. In other words, cut a tree here, lose a storm there. It's delicate, it's astonishing, it's real. And so we ask again, can an ecosystem decide to make it rain? Maybe not with thought, but with presence. With the intricate choreography of millions of species doing exactly what they've always done, breathing, feeding, nesting, dying in patterns that together shape the sky. What we mistake as chaos is often coordination. What looks like noise is often code. So tonight, if your window fogs gently with breath, if a faint drizzle taps at your roof, imagine this, not a weather report, not a random front, but a story written far away by a forest still intact, by vines wrapping ancient trunks, by monkeys scattering seeds, by flowers inhaling sunlight and exhaling rain. And maybe in that soft imagining, we remember something about ourselves too, that we too are part of a system, that we too exhale, influence, belong. In our next chapter, we'll explore a stranger place, still not of land or water, but something between. A creature that lives where humidity forms in the gaps where rain is almost sculpted by its posture. The desert beetle. But for now, close your eyes. Let the trees breathe for you. Let the sky take its cue. The ecosystem is singing, and you are safe inside its song. Let's return to the drylands, not the brittle, broken dryness of things ending, but the quiet, patient dryness of things waiting. The desert. It stretches like a breath held too long wide and golden and still. The sun may have gone, but the heat lingers like a memory, and the wind carries no cool promise. And yet, there is something here, something small, something alive. A flicker beneath a rock, a pause among the dust, a creature whose very body seems sculpted by silence. Tonight we're watching the thorny dragon, a lizard born into drought, shaped by sunlight and somehow against all odds, a master of catching rain. But here's the twist, there's rarely any rain. So how does it do it? How does this tiny creature not only survive, but gather water where there is none? The answer, as always, lies in the body, but also perhaps in something more. The thorny dragon is covered in spines, not for defense, though they might look intimidating, but for function. Along its skin is a network of microscopic grooves, capillary channels that run between and beneath the scales like hidden rivers. When a drop of moisture touches the lizard, be it a speck of dew, a bead of fog, or even condensed breath from the night air, it doesn't just sit there, it's drawn inward, pulled by capillary action through those grooves toward the corners of the mouth, where it can be swallowed almost without movement. The lizard drinks by standing still. But more remarkably, it doesn't wait for the rain. It finds water in air. When the fog rolls in faint and tentative, this lizard positions itself just right, facing the breeze low to the ground, allowing its body to become a collector, a sponge for invisible water. It doesn't run. It doesn't search. It becomes the place where rain can happen. A living instrument of condensation, and in this stillness it does something extraordinary. It changes the local climate, tiny though that change may be. Where it rests, heat is transferred, moisture is drawn down, The air just above its skin is slightly cooler, slightly wetter. And in an ecosystem where everything is on the brink, that slight change matters. Over time, if enough such creatures repeat this process, they become part of a wider moisture cycle. The beetles that come after benefit. The seeds beneath the sand feel the difference. And though we cannot see it with the naked eye, the air is altered. Just a touch, just enough. Now imagine this behavior across a population. Not a single dragon, but hundreds. Spreading across the landscape, positioned like natural sensors, absorbing water, redirecting it, surviving not by brute force, but by subtle participation in the sky's invisible movements. One researcher once called them living fog sculptures. Another more poetically said they were the rain's last wish carved into bone. But whatever name you give it, the thorny dragon and creatures like it represent a kind of biological intelligence that doesn't need thought to be brilliant. It only needs attention, refinement, patience stretched across generations. And then there are its feet. Unlike other desert creatures that leave barely a mark, the thorny dragon often leaves small, deliberate impressions, tiny depressions that trap night moisture, offering drinking opportunities not just for itself, but for insects and seeds and the soil beneath. It doesn't know it's doing this, but the effect is real. In this way, it becomes more than an animal. It becomes a weather tool, a sculptor of air, a choreographer of dew, and all of this elegance, this unseen grace happens without a single drop falling from the sky. Just vapor, just breath, just posture. You see, in the desert, water is not always a thing you chase. Sometimes it's a thing you invite. And maybe that's a lesson for more than just reptiles. Maybe in our own moments of drought, of spirit, of energy, of faith, we don't always need to run. Maybe we need to stand still open, designed by experience, to let the smallest blessings find their way to us. So, tonight, if the air around you feels dry, if your skin remembers heat, and your thoughts echo with the slow stillness of too much sun, remember the thorny dragon, not as a symbol, but as a quiet master of atmosphere. It doesn't plead for rain, it becomes rain's companion. And in that becoming, it changes the desert not through might but through design. In our next chapter, we'll return to the skies but with a new lens. Not through birds or bats or insects, but through something stranger. We'll meet the creatures that glide on air currents without wings. Spider seeds, bacteria riding thermals, reaching heights where clouds are born. Can the smallest travelers be the ones who whisper to the storm? That's a story for tomorrow. But for now, the desert rests. The lizard waits. And you are exactly where you need to be. Let's turn now toward the invisible, toward a force we rarely think about, though it crackles at our fingertips when we touch a doorknob in winter. A quiet shiver that passes between skin and object hair and breeze, fur and sky. Electricity, not the kind that powers lamps or flows from wires, but something older, something gentler, static, the soft electricity of nature. Tonight we drift into a strange corner of the world where the tiniest creatures, bugs, beetles, bees, and moths, carry this energy like whispers in their wings. And we ask, can insects use static electricity to influence weather? It sounds like magic, but like all the best magic, it begins with science. You've felt it before, hair rising slightly before a storm, the air humming with anticipation. That's not your imagination. As storm clouds build, they generate immense electric fields, powerful enough to move electrons along the surface of leaves, water, even animals. And insects with their delicate bodies and tiny hairs are particularly sensitive to these charges. More than sensitive, actually. They generate them. A bee flapping its wings through dry air becomes charged sometimes up to 200 volts. Not enough to shock, but enough to interact with the world around it in remarkable ways. When a charged bee lands on a flower, it creates a microscopic electric connection. The pollen, slightly oppositely charged, leaps from stamen to bee like a spark. This isn't just a mechanical transfer, it's an electrostatic embrace. The bee unknowingly has become a conductor, a pollinator, and a particle mover. Now imagine millions of bees across meadows and fields, each one lifting tiny, charged particles into the air, pollen dust spores. These particles don't just drift, they rise. Carried by warm air, they become part of the atmosphere, seeding clouds affecting how water vapor gathers, where droplets form, and when rain begins. This isn't fantasy. Researchers have measured the effects. In large enough numbers, swarms of insects can change the local electric field of the sky by as much as 100 volts per meter. That's equivalent to the electrical signature of a small thunderstorm. But here's the strange part. These fields, while subtle, influence how clouds behave. Water molecules in the air are polar, they align along electric gradients. When enough charge is present, condensation becomes more likely. A shift, a drop, a drizzle. It's not enough to summon storms from scratch, but perhaps enough to nudge the sky, to tilt the odds, to whisper. And it's not just bees. Locusts, those infamous travelers, generate immense electric fields as they fly. A swarm of locusts large enough to darken the sky also charges it. They carry with them not just hunger, but electricity. Some scientists speculate that in regions plagued by locusts, the swarms may contribute to strange weather patterns, not solely because of heat or biomass, but because of electrostatic change. It's a frontier of research, delicate and complicated, but it asks the kind of questions that make the night feel wide and full of wonder. Could insects be participating in weather without ever meaning to? We know they respond to it. Butterflies refuse to take flight when humidity changes subtly. Moths fly lower on electrified nights. Fireflies blink faster before storms, possibly sensing shifts in pressure and charge. But what if those responses ripple outward? What if millions of wings vibrating together don't just reflect the weather, but become a part of how it turns? And here's a thought, even stranger still. In the upper atmosphere, scientists have found bacterial spores alive. Carried by air currents, many of these microorganisms originated from insect-carried particles. Some are known to be ice-nucleating bacteria, meaning they help water freeze. These tiny travelers act as seeds for snowflakes, for hail, for ice crystals in clouds. Released from soil, lifted by wings, spun into the sky, then folded into weather systems far above the ground. They don't know they're part of a storm, but they are. So perhaps the insect is not just a bug, not just a creature crawling or buzzing at the edge of our perception. Perhaps it's a node in a system we're only beginning to map, a biological lightning rod, a messenger, a whisper in the electric breath between earth and sky. And perhaps more poetically, they're what reminds us that weather doesn't begin in clouds. It begins in motion, in touch, in friction, in flight, in a ladybug brushing against a stem, in a dragonfly skimming the water, in a mosquito. Hovering where heat and breath rise, each one carrying a charge, each one altering ever so slightly the space around it. So, tonight, if your blankets cling more tightly than usual, if the air feels charged with something you can't name, don't rush to explain it. Maybe it's just a shift in pressure. Or maybe a moth just landed nearby, its tiny body buzzing with the same static that dances in your fingers. And if you listen closely beneath the hum of appliances and the ticking of clocks, you might hear a softer sound, the sound of 1,000 tiny wings brushing gently against the edges of a storm not yet born. In our next chapter, we'll step into legend, into the ancient stories told by humans about animals and weather, and ask, why did so many cultures believe creatures could summon the sky? What did they see that we've forgotten? But for now, let your thoughts go still. Let the current pass through you. The insects are at work, and you are a part of the charge. Let's slip quietly now, not forward, but backward. Not into the sky or sea, but into memory. Into the long, flickering corridors of ancient minds, where stories weren't read, but lived. Where thunder wasn't noise, it was a voice. Where rain wasn't weather, it was will. Tonight, we leave the world of science, not in rebellion, but in reverence, and enter the world of myth. Because long before radar maps and climate models, humans looked to the animals and saw something else. Not just fur and feathers, but power, purpose, a direct connection to the sky, and perhaps, if we listen carefully, we might understand why. In nearly every ancient culture, there are animals linked to the weather, not just metaphorically, but personally. The frog who brings rain, the bird who sings the sun awake, the serpent who coils in the clouds and stirs the wind with its breath. These weren't mere decorations of belief. They were explanations rooted not in ignorance, but in observation. Because long before satellites, our ancestors watched animals. And animals, as we've seen, do sense the coming storm. They rise, retreat, call, vanish, reappear always in rhythm with the clouds. So when a tribe in West Africa says that the croak of the bullfrog wakes the rain spirits, or when a mountain people in Peru say that the condor calls the wind, they're not creating magic from nothing. They're naming what they saw again and again until it became truth. In Japanese folklore, there is the raiju, a lightning beast made of thunder and electricity, often taking the form of a cat or fox. It was said to curl up in sleeping humans' bellies, and when the thunder god Raijin called it back with a crack of lightning, it would leap away, leaving burns or scars. Strange, yes. But consider this: many animals curl up in tight places before storms, and static electricity can cause fur to crackle. What if once upon a time someone felt both an animal's warmth and a flash of static and tried to explain what the body felt in the language the heart understood? In North America, the Lakota people speak of the Thunkashila, the grandfather buffalo, who lives in the clouds and breathes the storms. When bison herds moved across the plains, the ground shook. The dust rose, and often within days the skies would open. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe those great migrations did shift the air, stir moisture, shape the winds. Perhaps the buffalo did bring rain, not through magic, but through presence. And in recognizing that the people gave it a name, a face, a reverence. In Australia, the rainbow serpent slithers across the sky, bringing water to the land and shaping rivers as it moves. In Chinese legend, dragons are not creatures of fire, but of water. They control the rain, the oceans, the clouds. In these tales, animals are not apart from the sky. They are the sky. Each movement above reflects a motion below. A bird takes flight, and the wind follows. A bear retreats into its den, and the snow begins to fall. The boundary between creature and cloud becomes soft, blurred, like mist. And perhaps this wasn't just storytelling. Perhaps it was survival. Imagine living in a world without weather forecasts, where knowing when the rains would come could mean the difference between feast and famine. The people who noticed that certain birds returned before the flood, or that foxes grew restless before snow, those people endured. And their stories endured with them. Over time, those observations became symbols. Symbols became spirits. And spirits became gods, not because humans were foolish, but because humans were attentive, attuned. And here's the most beautiful part. The stories didn't just explain weather, they shaped behavior. If you believed the heron was a rainbringer, you wouldn't hunt it. If the frog's song summoned water, you would protect the pond. Myth in this way became ecology, not science, but stewardship, a kind of cultural code for living in harmony with the rhythms of the earth. And what if we haven't lost that entirely? What if deep in us we still feel that tug, that subtle thrill when we see birds wheel before a storm, that unease when the forest goes silent, that awe when the ocean pulls back too far, too fast? These feelings are echoes, ghosts of old stories, not lies but lullabies, the way the earth sang to us when we still listened with our whole selves. So tonight, as you lie still beneath your roof, your ceiling, your blanket of modern certainty, remember that somewhere long ago, a child sat beside a fire, listening to their grandmother say, "When the turtle cries, the clouds are coming." And maybe, just maybe, that child closed their eyes and heard thunder on the horizon. In our next chapter, we'll turn toward something else entirely. toward numbers, toward research, but not to leave behind the magic, instead to see what happens when science meets the stories. We'll explore the emerging studies that suggest animals might truly influence climate systems at scale, not just metaphorically, but measurably. The myth is ending. The evidence is beginning. But for now, sleep. Let the old stories settle around you like fog. The frog is singing. The wind is listening. And you are a part of the tale. Let's gently pull ourselves back into the present, not away from the magic, but into its reflection. Into the quiet labs, the whiteboards filled with questions, the slow hum of data being recorded in the background. Science. A place that often feels cold and clinical, yet tonight we enter it with warmth. Because something remarkable is happening in those quiet corners of research. The ancient whispers of folklore of animals shaping the weather are beginning to echo through controlled trials, through simulations, through numbers. What once lived in myth is now being studied under microscopes, modeled in equations, chased through forests with wind meters and thermal cameras. Tonight, we explore the simple but astonishing question: can animals, through behavior, scale, and biology, alter the climate around them? Not hypothetically, not in theory, but in testable, observable ways. The answer, quietly but increasingly, is yes. It began with bees. Scientists at the University of Bristol designed a series of experiments to study static electricity generated by insect wings. In controlled chambers, they released swarms of bumblebees and monitored the resulting changes in electric field density. The result: when bees gathered in sufficient numbers, they created atmospheric electrical shifts equivalent to low-level weather events. The same principle was later observed in migrating locusts, those large, sweeping waves of insects we once saw only as plagues. But researchers with portable sensors noticed something odd. As the swarms passed, the electric field of the sky above changed. And those changes, though brief, affected how dust rose from the earth, how moisture moved through the air. What was once chaos became influence. Another team in Namibia studied termite mounds not for architecture, but for atmosphere. They found that these intricate dirt towers don't just house insects, they breathe, they move air. Through a combination of passive convection and thermal regulation, the mounds act as climate engines, cooling their surroundings during the heat of day, warming them at night. In some regions, satellite imaging showed vegetation growing more densely in a halo around termite mounds, suggesting that the temperature and humidity patterns created by the insects were shaping the microclimate not just for themselves, but for the entire biome. Termites, in effect, were making islands of weather, repeatable, predictable, measurable. Then came the ants. Researchers placed sensors near ant colonies in both arid and temperate zones. As the ants moved, soil built tunnels and rearranged organic matter. The scientists recorded changes in soil temperature, gas exchange, and water retention. These shifts affected how quickly heat radiated from the ground at night and how moisture was lost during the day. In other words, the ants were changing not only their nest, but the weather above it. On a small scale, yes. But scale, as science teaches us, is just a matter of numbers. Billions of colonies across continents repeating these behaviors year after year, that's no longer small. And what about the birds? Researchers at the Max Planck Institute began tracking massive flocks with Doppler radar and atmospheric sensors. When birds migrated en masse, especially in lower altitudes, their movement stirred the air in patterns similar to those of wind turbines. These avian waves, they found, could redirect airflow, disrupt fog formation, and in some conditions nudge low-lying clouds just enough to delay rainfall. Not cancel it, not create it, but shape its path. Even mammals are now under the microscope. Studies in Arctic zones have followed caribou herds whose mass movement affects snow distribution. Their trampling of snowpacks changes the albedo, the reflectiveness of the ground, altering how much sunlight is absorbed or reflected. Over time, this affects thaw rates, soil temperature, even the timing of seasonal plant blooms. The animals, simply by walking, are editing the seasonal calendar of an entire ecosystem. And then there are whales. We've spoken of them already, but now in labs and models, their influence is becoming sharper. Scientists are simulating ocean carbon cycles with and without whale fecal plumes. The difference: billions of tons of carbon drawdown. Not symbolic, not speculative, but chemical measurable fact. The whale, once a mythic mover of the sea, is now seen as a climate asset, a slow breathing machine of carbon transfer. But perhaps the most beautiful discovery isn't about individual experiments. It's about pattern. Across ecosystems, across species, the data begins to say the same thing. Life doesn't just adapt to weather, it helps make it, through breath, through flight, through waste, through presence. Every living thing, no matter how small, moves heat, shifts moisture, holds, or releases carbon, stirs wind. And all of it, when seen from a high enough view, becomes weather. Not in the way of lightning bolts or sweeping storms, but in gradients, in flow, in influence. Some ecologists now speak of biotic climate, forcing a term that once sounded fringe, now becoming foundational. It means that ecosystems aren't just passive backgrounds, they're active participants. Climate isn't a script handed down from the sky, it's a conversation. And animals, it turns out, have been speaking all along. So tonight, if you find yourself wondering whether your presence matters, whether your motion stirs anything beyond your own thoughts, remember this. Even an ant shifts the air. Even a bee carries charge. Even the flap of a bird's wing can change when and where the rain decides to fall. And if animals shape their world without ever meaning to, then maybe we can do the same, only gently, only thoughtfully, only with love. In our next chapter, we'll leave the realm of data and return to dreams. We'll imagine if animals influence weather, what would a world designed by them look like? A sky written by wings, a wind shaped by song. But for now, sleep. Let the numbers fade into rhythm. Let the science become lullaby. The experiments are still running, but you can rest. Let's let go now of fact, of experiment, of instruments and control groups and measured variables. Let's drift sideways into the warm quiet of the imagination, the part of the mind that wakes up only when everything else slows down, the part that doesn't need proof, only possibility. Tonight we ask a question with no chart, no data, no citation, only wonder what if animals really did control the weather, not influence it, not nudge it, but truly fully decide what the sky would do. What would the world look like then? Close your eyes and come with me. Let's imagine. Maybe it starts with the birds. Early morning. The sun hasn't yet broken the horizon, but the trees begin to stir. A flock of finches takes to the air, not randomly, but with purpose. Their wings create small ripples in the cool dawn mist, and those ripples rise, carrying scent, warmth, a soft electric charge. High above the clouds respond. They thin slightly as if listening. The birds, in a coordinated spiral, rise higher. The wind follows, and slowly the morning fog begins to lift, not because the sun said so, but because the birds were ready. Somewhere else, the frogs begin to sing. Not from boredom or habit, but from need. The pond is low, the air is dry, and so in the stillness of dusk a chorus rises. Their song vibrates the water, calling vapor from the leaves, from the soil, from each other's breath. The air thickens. Not much, just enough. By midnight, the clouds arrive, and just before dawn, a soft, steady rain begins. The frogs fall silent. Their work is done. In this world, weather doesn't surprise. It converses. The elephants migrate not just to find rain, but to pull it. Their heavy footsteps press heat into the soil. Their breath stirs particles in the air. And days later, behind them, storms form. Gentle, slow-moving, generous. The land responds grateful. The whales rise not only to breathe, but to seed clouds. Their exhalations release warmth. Their waste feeds blooms. Their slow circles under the surface are like prayers, long, sweeping calls to the atmosphere above. And over time, the winds shift. Rain falls where it is needed. The ocean calms. In this world, the wind is no longer wild. It is not fought, but guided, shaped by the wings of migrating geese who ride thermals not just to save energy, but to rearrange the air itself. One flock rises, another descends. The result is a current, subtle, smooth, constant. Wind that learns to listen. The insects, tiny and nearly invisible, carry static like sacred dust. They rise in clouds, bees, butterflies, beetles, and the sky shivers. Clouds tighten, then relax. Lightning flashes not in violence, but like punctuation at the end of a sentence. Rain follows in light strokes. The flowers below bloom on cue. Even the snow is thoughtful, crafted by Arctic foxes as they run by seals as they roll on the ice. Each body motion folds. The cold differently teaches the flakes how to fall, not too hard, not too fast, just enough to blanket the land in sleep. Even blizzards have rhythm here, and in the desert, the lizards still wait, still drink the wind. But now, when one raises its head to the breeze, it is not just for survival, it is to send a signal. A message passed in heat and silence across the sands, to the beetles, to the birds, to the plants that sleep beneath. Now the lizard says, now is the time. And somewhere above, a small cloud takes shape. In this imagined world, weather is not commanded. It is negotiated. It is not forecast. It is felt. Animals don't speak with words, but with presence, with movement, with pattern. Together they become the composers of sky, the architects of air. And we, the humans, are not in charge here. But we are not left out. We learn to listen. We build not machines, but rituals. We sit quietly when the frogs sing. We plant only when the bees rise. We travel with the birds, not beside them. And slowly our breath begins to match the rhythm of the earth again. Maybe this sounds like a dream. Maybe it is. But dreams are not false. They are futures we haven't yet dared to build. And maybe, just maybe, this one isn't so far. Because even now animals shape weather, not with intention, but with presence. And presence is power. So tonight, let yourself wonder. Let the walls of the room melt into forest, into ocean, into sky. Let your pulse slow until it matches the beat of wings, the murmur of wind, the breath of whales in sleep. The world is not silent. It's just been waiting for us to hear it again. In our next chapter, we'll turn inward, to the idea of ecosystems as mind's collective intelligence, not of thought, but of connection. Could the forest think the rain into being? Could the coral dream, the current into motion? But for now, drift. The weather is resting, and you, dear listener, are part of its dream. Let's go still now, still in body, in thought, in sound, not because the journey is ending, but because the circle is closing. We've walked through forests and deserts swum with whales, watched birds rewrite the wind, followed frogs and lizards and the tiniest insects as they stirred the breath of the planet. We've imagined what would happen if animals could control the weather. But maybe now at the edge of sleep the question has shifted. Maybe the answer isn't about control at all. Maybe the real question is softer, stranger, more beautiful. What if the weather isn't something outside of life, but something life creates as it breathes? Not with intention, not with command, but with presence, with connection. What if ecosystems aren't just collections of creatures and plants and soil and air, but minds? Minds not made of neurons, but of feedback, of rhythm, of exchange. Tonight we sit quietly within that idea, the ecosystem as a kind of intelligence. Not like ours, not linear, not linguistic, but woven, distributed. A consciousness without a center, without ego, but still very much alive. You see, everything we've explored, every frog's song, every bee's wing, every elephant's step, wasn't a performance. It was part of a larger conversation, one in which weather is not the goal, not the point, but the result, a consequence of life interacting with itself. Plants exhale, Animals move microbes, ferment wind, stirs, moisture collects. And somewhere along that thread, a cloud forms. A storm builds. A breeze drifts in through your open window. The rain falls. Not because something decided to make it happen, but because everything happened together. Think of a coral reef. It doesn't have a leader. No organism tells the others what to do. But the reef knows how to grow, how to balance acidity, how to circulate water. It's a brain of 1,000 species each, doing what it's always done, but doing it in tune with the rest. Or the canopy of a rainforest, how it breathes, how it catches light, how it sends messages underground through roots and fungi and chemical pulses. A mind made not of thoughts, but of timing, of harmony. Or a grassland responding to the movement of grazers. A desert shaped by the feet of beetles. A tundra tuned by the howl of wolves. Everywhere you look, life isn't reacting to weather, it's participating in it. And maybe that's the truth. We've forgotten weather is not a force from above, but a mirror. It reflects what life is doing on the ground. It's not a script written in the clouds, but a song played through trillions of bodies. And like any good song, it changes as the instruments change. When forests fall, when whales vanish, when soil is silenced, the weather forgets how to sing. The harmony breaks, the storms shift, the winds grow confused, and the world grows noisy, but less alive. But it's not too late, because if weather is a result of connection, then healing it begins not with control, but with reconnection, with listening, with remembering that we too are part of the song. Our breath matters, our movement, our stillness, when we plant, when we protect, when we restore not just land but relationships. Then maybe the sky will start to remember its rhythm again. Maybe the rain will fall in better places. Maybe the heat will ease its grip. Maybe the storms will stop shouting. And maybe, just maybe if we let go of trying to own the weather and instead live with it as every other creature does, we'll rediscover something we didn't even know we'd lost, the feeling of being home in the world. Not separate, not above, but held, included, listened to. So tonight, as you lie there, quiet and soft in the hush of your own room, know this: the wind outside, the silence between crickets, the rhythm of your breath, they're all part of the same thing. A great breathing tapestry, a system not of chaos, but of care. A mind without a face, but with infinite hands. You are not beneath it. You are not beside it. You are within it. The weather does not begin in the clouds. It begins here, in the pulse of roots, in the lift of wings, in the warmth of a lizard's belly, in you. And with that, we close our circle. The animals are resting. The clouds are listening. The earth is exhaling. And you are safe in its breath. Let's settle now, not to stop, but to arrive. After a long, meandering journey through the unseen corridors of nature, through song and silent scale and softness, we've circled back to where it all began, the air around us. And maybe now, with the lights low and your body softened into stillness, we're ready to consider something both simple and immense. That weather isn't something decided from above, but something emerges from within, from life, from rhythm, from the breathing shape of things as they are. It's not something to chase, not something to blame, not something to fear, but something to feel, something that happens because everything else is already happening. Tonight, we imagine the ecosystem as a kind of mind, not one with thoughts and language, but with pulse. A mind made of many of roots and feathers, hooves and clouds of breath and decay and the long silence of stone. A distributed intelligence, not centered, not speaking, but knowing. Every frog that sings, every leaf that curls, every bee that lifts a particle of pollen into the air, they're not acting alone. They're responding to each other, echoing each other, reinforcing each other. And from that feedback, the weather rises not as a goal, but as a side effect of life paying attention to itself. And maybe we've been looking at it backward all along. We've asked, how does the weather shape life? But maybe we should also ask, how does life shape weather? And not just in carbon and chemistry, but in presence, in gesture, in choice, in a forest that exhales a little more moisture because the soil was softened by the steps of a deer, in a storm that arrives 2 days earlier because a flock of starlings lifted into the air together, in a breeze that changes shape because the whales below it stirred the sea just so. These aren't fantasies, they're phenomena. They're what happens when life is allowed to function not as a collection of parts, but as a whole. The forest, then, is not just a place. It's a memory, a conversation, a feedback system that remembers how to make rain. The coral reef is not just rock and fish. It's a pulse timing the currents. And we, yes, even we are part of it. We move heat, we plant things, we shape wind with our cities. And while we've done much harm, we've also learned. We've begun to see that healing the planet doesn't only mean fixing emissions. It means restoring relationships between species, between systems, between presence and result. Maybe in the end, that's what weather is, a visible artifact of invisible relationships, a sky painted by every living thing simply by being alive. So tonight, as your mind drifts gently toward rest, imagine this: the air you breathe has passed through trees, through lungs not your own, through the mouths of moss and the stillness of mountains. You are part of the weather. You are part of the thought the earth is having about itself. And that is beautiful. Let the last word be not control, but connection. Not question, but rhythm. Not theory, but trust. The sky is not distant. It's here, inside you, moving with you, listening back. And now, finally, rest. Let's turn our attention downward now, beneath the roots, beneath the stones, beneath the leaf-littered silence where sunlight no longer touches. The ground, for most of us, is just that, a surface, something to walk on, something to bury in. But beneath your feet, right now, in darkness, so soft it almost hums, a vast network is alive, breathing, moving, whispering. Tonight, we explore what might be the most overlooked composer in the symphony of weather, the underground. Because before the rain falls, before clouds gather, before wind stirs the branches, something shifts in the soil, something tiny, something slow, and, strangely, something aware. Beneath the forest, a network of fungal threads, known as mycorrhizae, connects trees to one another like synapses in a brain. They don't just transport nutrients, they send signals. When one tree is thirsty, others know. When a patch of roots begins to rot, the surrounding forest shifts how it shares. And among these threads, insects move: ants, beetles, larvae termites shaping tunnels, releasing gases, stirring warmth. The result is more than soil turnover. It's a churning of heat, of moisture, of microbial breath. And as it happens, gradually, steadily, the air above begins to notice. In one study, scientists measured the humidity just inches above the ground in active termite regions. The numbers fluctuated not with sunlight or surface wind, but with the rhythm of the colony below. The termites moving in unison raised temperature slightly. The temperature encouraged evaporation. The evaporation fed humidity. The humidity carried upward, triggered small-scale condensation in nearby air, not enough to cause a thunderstorm, but enough to nudge the atmosphere closer to one. In tropical forests, certain beetles release gases that interact with fungal growth, accelerating decomposition in specific areas. The heat from that process, combined with the moisture released, creates localized thermal currents. These currents, barely perceptible to the human body, change how air rises through the canopy. And rising air, of course, is the beginning of weather. Now, imagine these underground systems not in isolation, but scaled across millions of square kilometers. Imagine each ant colony, each fungal thread, each wriggling worm as part of a continent-wide conversation. The soil doesn't just store carbon, it releases it. It exhales moisture. It buffers heat. And every living thing within it, from nematode to mushroom, is part of a quiet regulation system. The Earth, in this way, is not just a surface we live upon. It is a second sky inverted, a sky that thinks slowly, gently, with patience longer than any storm. And still deeper, there is more. Some fungi emit spores into the air that, like pollen and dust, serve as nuclei for cloud formation. These spores rise, catch the updrafts born from the warmth of decaying root mats, and lift into the sky where moisture begins to collect around them. It's a phenomenon scientists have only recently started tracing. The idea that the weather we see might be seeded by life, not in the treetops, but in the loam, in the rot, in the rebirth happening in darkness. One researcher called this the breath of the soil, a slow exhale of gases, spores, vapor, and heat rising into the forest, into the air, into the clouds. Another called it the hidden meteorology. And maybe that's what it is, a kind of weather that doesn't roar or flash. It doesn't scream for our attention. But it's there, constant. Insect by insect, thread by thread, memory by memory. A weather that grows slowly upward rather than falling from above. And what if this is intention? Not conscious, perhaps, but coordinated, emergent. 1,000 underground lives responding to shifts in moisture, temperature, microbial bloom, responding not to control the weather, but to maintain balance. Because in the end, maybe that's all weather truly is, not an event, but a moment of rebalancing, a movement toward equilibrium. And life underground and above participates in that movement without needing to understand it. So, tonight, if your room feels still and the world outside seems asleep, try to remember what's beneath you, beneath the carpet, the concrete, the bed frame, beneath the street, the foundation, the roots. A living tapestry woven in silence, shaping the air you'll breathe tomorrow. The next cloud you'll watch, the next drop that will tap at your window while you sleep. In our next chapter, we'll rise back into the sky, but through the lens of chaos. We'll ask what happens when nature loses that rhythm. When animals vanish and ecosystems collapse, can the weather forget how to behave? But for now, let the ground hold you. Let the dark be kind. The forest below is breathing, and you are breathing with it. Let's pause tonight in a place we rarely want to visit, the space where things fall out of rhythm, where the breath stutters, where the silence is not peace, but absence. For so long we've wandered through the elegant harmony of nature. We've listened to frogs sing the rain into being, watched birds rewrite the wind, traced the breath of whales across the ocean's skin. But what happens when that rhythm breaks? What happens when the singers disappear, when the wind no longer listens? Tonight we lean into a quieter kind of mystery, not of how animals shape the weather, but of what the weather becomes when those animals are gone. It doesn't begin as catastrophe. It begins as silence. A forest where the frogs have gone quiet, not because it's night, but because they are no longer there. Their eggs never hatched, their ponds dried up. Without their songs, the insects rise unchecked, the humidity remains unmoved, and the clouds delay. A subtle shift, a delay, a storm that would have arrived, doesn't. And the heat lingers just a little longer than it should. In the sky, birds once moved in synchrony, thousands of wings, guiding the thermals, tuning the flow of wind through valleys and plains. But now their numbers are fewer, their paths broken, their migratory pulses weakened, and the air loses its discipline. Small currents grow wild, the jet stream stutters, storm systems swell in unpredictable ways, not more powerful but less wise. Like an orchestra playing without its conductor, the sky begins to wander. In the soil, the ants no longer turn the earth with the same precision. The termites no longer breathe their steady warmth into the roots. The balance of moisture shifts. The breath of the land grows uneven. Rain doesn't know where to fall. When it does, it falls too hard, too fast, or not at all. And the whales, the deep architects of oxygen and calm. Their numbers thinned, their migrations disrupted. The iron they once brought to the surface stays hidden. The plankton blooms fade. Carbon that should have been drawn downward remains aloft, warming the sky degree by uncertain degree. The ocean loses its memory. The clouds lose their map. This is not punishment. It is not vengeance. It is simply what happens when conversation ends. Weather, you see, is a language, and without enough voices it begins to forget what to say. The air grows anxious, the heat becomes impatient, the rains lose their rhythm and arrive all at once in fits and bursts, where once they arrived like breath steady, soft, restorative. In India, monsoons that were once reliable now arrive too early too late, or not at all. In the Arctic, ice melts faster than migration can adapt. Reindeer paths crumble, bears wander longer in search of food, and their presence shifts predator-prey balances, reshaping the land. The pattern breaks. And when the pattern breaks, the sky does too. And yet, even in this unraveling, the earth is not angry. It is confused. It is trying. The systems still function, but they reach out and find fewer hands, fewer wings, fewer hearts still beating in tune. The music is still playing, but whole sections of the orchestra have gone silent. So what is left? Where do we go when the rhythm falters? We listen carefully to what remains, to the small and the stubborn, the lone frog that still sings even if no one answers, the bird that still flies the same path though its sky is lonelier, the tree that still releases its breath in rhythm hoping the rain remembers, and maybe to ourselves. Because we are not separate from this rhythm, we are not observers, we are participants. Our cities, our machines, our choices, they shape the air just as surely as the bees and the birds. And now, more than ever, the weather reflects us, not just biologically, but emotionally. It is confused because we are. It is restless because we are. It has become harder to predict because our movements have become harder to trust. But here's the quiet truth. Beneath the worry, rhythms can be relearned. Songs can be remembered. Ecosystems, when given time and care, find their harmony again. The whales return. The ants dig new tunnels. The birds rediscover old winds. And the weather begins to soften. Because the sky is not cruel. It is responsive. It reflects the state of the living world beneath it. And we are part of that world. What we protect protects us. What we let live teaches the air how to move again. So tonight, if the world feels strange, if the winds seem restless, and the rains uncertain, take comfort not in answers, but in presence. In the small things still alive, in the frogs still calling, in the seeds still sprouting, and in your own breath, steady, soft, unremarkable, but part of it all. In our next chapter, we'll explore the future not as warning, but as invitation. What might happen if we choose to reconnect, if we design cities like ecosystems and live not above nature, but within it once more? Can the sky learn to trust us again? But for now, close your eyes. The storm is still learning. The earth is still listening. And you are still part of the pattern. Let's imagine something gentle tonight. Not a fantasy, not a utopia, just a possibility, quiet, reachable, waiting just beyond the way things are. Let's imagine a world where we live not on the earth but with it, not beside nature but within it, where our cities breathe, where our buildings sweat and shade like trees, where our lives are not separate from the rhythm of frogs and birds and wind but synchronized with them. And then let's ask, if we lived like that, would the weather soften again? Not all at once, not like turning a key, but like a wound closing slowly, like a river remembering its shape. In this imagined world, we stop fighting the sky. We stop sealing our lives off from the breath of the land. We design differently. We walk differently. We measure value differently. The lines between natural and artificial begin to blur, not into confusion, but into cooperation. In this world, the walls of our homes breathe. Literally. Materials expand and contract with humidity. Roofs collect water the way leaves do. Windows open not just for light, but to listen. And because we let air move through our spaces instead of around them, the city itself stops overheating. The heat islands that once stirred violent storms begin to fade. The clouds stop flinching. The wind stops pushing back. Outside, our streets become corridors of biodiversity, not as decoration, but as integration. Parks aren't rectangles of green between gray, they're arteries, continuous networks of root and leaf that stitch together microclimates. Bees return, birds return, and with them the feedback loops of breath and pollen and morning mist. We no longer rely only on machines to regulate the temperature. We rely on systems, living systems, that once did so for millions of years before we arrived. And remarkably, they remember how. In this world, we farm not by conquering the land, but by coaxing it. We let hedgerows stand. We allow insects their place. We time our planting not by profit margin, but by soil song. The air above these farms changes. Evaporation becomes more steady. Rain becomes less urgent. The downpours shrink. The dry spells shorten. Not because we forced them, but because we gave the land space to regulate itself again. And our presence begins to matter differently. Where once a human footprint meant extraction, it now means participation. We restore wetlands. We replant forests, but not just with trees, with fungi, with frogs, with the whole invisible choir that makes the sky remember how to rain gently. We stop blocking rivers, and when they flood again, not in rage, but in rhythm, we let them. Because sometimes the earth needs to breathe through water, and we no longer fear that breath. We make room for it. And what of the cities, the great metal skylines that once seemed to pierce the clouds like weapons? They change too. Rooftops become gardens. Towers mimic termite mounds, drawing air through their cores to cool themselves without compressors. Pavement softens permeable, shaded forgiving. And below underground, we design with the knowledge that soil is not dead. It is not a void to build through, but a partner. We let it hold moisture. Let it exhale. Let it remember. And because of all this, because we have made room for the world to work, the sky responds. Not immediately, but gradually, gently. The storms lose their sharpness. The wind, once restless, slows. The heat arrives still, but not like punishment. More like warning. A whisper, careful now. And we listen. Because now we know how. Maybe this sounds idealistic. Maybe it is. But all of it is possible. Every solution already exists somewhere. Someone is already building like this, farming like this, walking like this. And the weather around them is different, softer, closer, more forgiving. And perhaps this is the lesson we've been circling toward all along, that the weather has always been a reflection of frogs, of whales, of trees, of wind, of wings, and now increasingly of us. So if we want gentler skies, we must become gentler people. Not weaker, not quieter, but more connected, more rooted, more in tune with the millions of tiny signals that once taught the earth how to breathe. So tonight, as you rest perhaps beneath a ceiling, perhaps beneath a star, you are not far from this world. It is not a dream. It is a choice, a slow return to a truth that never left, that we belong, not to power, but to pattern. In our next chapter, we will step away from Earth just briefly and look toward other species in other environments that also shape their own: climate coral reefs, kelp forests, even deep-sea vents. But for now, feel the air. It has been shaped by breath older than yours, and it will shape the dreams you carry into morning. And the weather is listening. Let's go deep now. Not just into thought, but into pressure. Into silence so complete it hums in your bones. Down past the sunlit shallows, past the kelp forests and coral cities, past the twilight zone where color fades and things begin to glow. Down into the abyss. A place where sunlight never arrives, where the cold bites not with violence but with ancient calm. The deep sea. A place so unfamiliar that it feels like another planet, and yet it is here beneath us, holding the very shape of the earth. And tonight, in this great breathing dark, we listen to the smallest, strangest creatures and ask, could they be shaping the climate above? It seems absurd. What could a worm crawling across the ocean floor possibly have to do with the rain tapping on your window? But remember what we've learned: the weather is not just a product of the clouds, it's the echo of everything living. And here in the deep life lives very differently, but no less meaningfully. Let's begin with the sea cucumbers. They lie along the seafloor in quiet multitudes, slowly ingesting sediment, digesting organic matter, and releasing it again, cleaner, richer, slightly altered. Their movement stirs the upper layers of the ocean floor just enough to release trapped carbon, oxygen, nitrogen. This exchange, minute and constant, ripples upward. It feeds bacteria. It feeds currents. And the carbon, instead of floating back into the atmosphere, is pulled deeper, locked away for centuries. The ocean doesn't bury it. Life does. Then there are the tube worms, those elegant creatures clustering around hydrothermal vents where boiling water meets freezing sea. They live without sunlight, without photosynthesis. Instead, they host chemosynthetic bacteria inside their own tissues, turning toxic gases into life. But more than that, their presence alters the chemistry of entire zones. By consuming sulfur and methane, powerful greenhouse gases, they prevent some of the most climate-reactive molecules from rising to the surface. In silence, in darkness, in complete absence of eyes or praise. Now look to the krill, not deep-sea dwellers per se, but frequent visitors to the twilight zone. These tiny crustaceans rise each night toward the surface and descend again each day in what's known as the deep scattering layer migration, the largest movement of biomass on Earth. Trillions of bodies rising and falling with the rhythm of the sun. And as they do, they carry carbon with them, eating at the surface, releasing waste in the deep, acting as elevators for climate. If krill populations decline, this vertical circulation falters. The ocean's ability to absorb carbon weakens. Storms grow stronger. The heat stays longer. Even bacteria in the deepest mud play a role. They produce compounds that affect how nutrients circulate. Some of these microbes, called methanotrophs, consume methane before it reaches the water column, stopping a potent greenhouse gas in its tracks. Without them, the ocean would belch methane into the sky unchecked. With them, the water holds its peace. All of this happens where no sunlight shines, where no leaf ever grows. And yet the weather feels it. A delay in krill spawning shifts the timing of phytoplankton blooms at the surface, which alters cloud seed concentration, which changes how the sky cools the land. A disturbance at the seafloor slows the sinking of marine snow, tiny particles falling like soft ash, which alters the carbon balance of entire hemispheres. These are not metaphors. These are dynamics, measurable, delicate, deep. And then there are the whale falls, when a great whale dies and sinks. Its body becomes an island in the deep. Over years, it is consumed by hundreds of species, many of which exist nowhere else. The decomposition of the whale's body releases nutrients back into the abyss, feeding microbial blooms that spread for kilometers. And some of those microbes drift upward, layer by layer, eventually reaching zones where they influence nutrient cycling, which affects fish, which affects birds, which affects wind. A dead whale, then, is not an ending. It is a whisper, and the sky hears it. So maybe it's time to let go of the idea that only what we see matters, that only what flies shapes the clouds, that only what lives in light belongs to weather. Because below in the hush and pressure, the earth is constantly adjusting itself, not through storms and heat, but through patience. Through molecules passed from claw to fin to current. And in that patience, there is power. What would happen if these deep systems collapsed, if ocean acidification spread, if temperature rose just enough to drive bacteria out of balance, if mining or pollution silenced the hydrothermal cities? We don't know. But some scientists fear that the weather might not grow more violent. It might grow unstable, not in volume, but in memory, forgetting when to rain, forgetting where to cool, forgetting how to breathe. And so, tonight, let us hold a quiet gratitude for creatures we'll never meet, in places we'll never see doing work we'll never fully understand. They do not ask us to notice. But the rain does, the clouds do, the wind does, and so should we. In our next chapter, we'll return to the surface to the Arctic, where melting permafrost releases ancient gases and reindeer paths may help stabilize them, a strange intersection of climate memory and migration. But for now, the deep is resting, the salt is still, the currents have slowed, and you are floating quietly within it. Let's walk slowly now, each step softened by snow, each breath a visible cloud in the still biting air. We are in the north. Not north on a map, but north in feeling. A place where silence stretches wide, where wind sings in open tones, and where time folds into long white stillness. The Arctic. It is more than a place. It is a memory frozen into landscape, a breathing, trembling archive of climate. And tonight we walk with those who remember it best, the reindeer, the caribou, the hoofed wandering architects of ice and air. And we ask a question that seems strange until you feel it settle in your chest. Could the footsteps of reindeer help calm the sky? We begin with permafrost, a word that sounds solid, certain, permanent. But it is not. Permafrost is ground that has stayed frozen for centuries. Layers of ice soil, ancient roots and bones locked in place by cold. It stores immense amounts of carbon frozen in organic matter that never fully decayed. But now, as temperatures rise, that frozen memory is beginning to thaw. And as it does, the trapped carbon awakens, rising into the air as carbon dioxide and methane. Invisible, weightless, but heavy in consequence. A release that quickens the warming it was born from. A quiet unraveling. A feedback loop with no mercy. But then, there are the reindeer. They move slowly, in herds, across hundreds, sometimes thousands of kilometers. They migrate season after season, guided not by roads, but by instinct. And as they do, they press their hooves into the snow over and over, breaking the pristine surface, compressing it, flattening it. Their tracks disturb what looks untouched, and in that disturbance, something unexpected happens. The snow becomes thinner. The cold above reaches deeper into the ground, and the permafrost stays frozen longer. It's called snow trampling. And in recent studies, scientists found that herds of large animals, reindeer, musk, oxen, bison, can reduce the insulating effect of snow. By compacting it, they allow winter's full chill to sink into the soil, and that deeper cold helps keep the permafrost stable. In regions without animals, snow sits light and fluffy, holding warmth beneath like a blanket. But where herds pass, the ground breathes cold. It remembers how to sleep. This isn't intentional. The reindeer aren't acting as climate engineers. They're simply doing what they have always done, wandering, grazing, surviving. But their movement matters. Their pattern matters. It turns out in a warming Arctic hooves may be more powerful than fences. In one simulation, reintroducing herds of large herbivores across tundra, landscapes reduced permafrost melt by nearly 50%. Not by stopping the heat, but by letting the cold in. And this isn't the only way they help. As reindeer graze, they keep shrubs and trees from spreading too far. This matters because taller plants absorb more sunlight, warming the ground faster. By keeping the tundra low and open, the reindeer help reflect sunlight back into the sky. More white, less absorption. A cooler balance. Again, unintentional, but real. So now imagine thousands of reindeer moving as they always have, their bodies stirring the snow, their mouths pruning the land, their hooves sculpting the thermal memory of the earth. Not loudly, not visibly, but enough to shift a pattern, enough to slow a thaw. And maybe that's the deeper story here, that not all solutions must be new. That some of them are old, ancient, already walking among us, because the Arctic didn't become what it is through absence. It became what it is through presence, through life, through fur and hoof and breath. And as those lives disappear through fences, industry warming the permafrost does not just lose its insulation, it loses its rhythm. Some scientists now speak of rewilding the climate. The idea that restoring animals to the landscapes they once shaped might be one of our greatest tools for restoring the climate itself, not as a cure, but as a recalibration. Because the weather does not only reflect atmosphere, it reflects relationship. And when those relationships are broken, the sky stumbles. But when they are restored, the air remembers. So, tonight, if the air around you feels still, if the night is quiet and white in your imagination, picture them a line of reindeer moving across a frozen field, their breath visible, their rhythm ancient, their path uncertain. And yet every step presses the memory of winter deeper into the earth, not with force, but with belonging. In our next chapter, we'll look at a different kind of climate sculptor trees, not as oxygen makers, but as engineers of rain. Can a forest truly call clouds to itself? That's a story waiting in the mist. But for now, rest in the cold. It is not cruel tonight, it is calm, and it remembers you.